What I'm about to tell you is probably the single craziest thing that's ever happened to me. If there was one event from my life that I think transcends just being a personal experience and would make a good movie or short film or something, it's this. So, back in 2012, I used to work at a card shop here in Pittsburgh. We weren't like a greetings card store though. We bought and sold trading card games or TCGs. I'm talking about things like Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, stuff like that. As part of our jobs, we were very active in online message boards related to various trading card games, especially when it came to buying, selling, and trading threads. We did a lot of business using those message boards, and they were also where we got all our news regarding updates and new releases for the various TCGs that we dealt in. And so, one day, I roll into the shop to find my boss and a coworker sat in the office in just complete silence. They were just staring at the office's computer screen, all this wall of text that had been posted on one of the TCG message boards, and when I asked them what the deal was, they gave me the TLDR. One of the largest collections of Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the entire United States had been stolen from its owner, and according to the post on the message board, the robbery itself had been absolutely terrible. Two guys in ski masks broke into the collector's house, tied him up at gunpoint, and then tortured him until he gave up his cards. The collector had all of his rarest and most valuable cards locked up in a safe and had his less valuable collection on display. But then instead of just grabbing binders full of cards, the robbers seemed to know that the more valuable ones would be locked away somewhere, almost like they had inside knowledge of this collector's habits. The guy ended up in the hospital and had to have an emergency transfusion from all the blood that he'd lost. I think he tried to hold out and talk them into taking the less valuable cards or something, but they knew that they just had to burn him or cut him a little more and he'd eventually give up the goods. And they were right too. The message board post went on to say that literally thousands of dollars worth of cards had been stolen from this guy and basically warned every collector and dealer on the East Coast to watch their backs and be on the lookout for this dude's stolen collection. As you can imagine, we were all pretty shocked. I mean, it's actually not all that uncommon for thefts to occur in the TCG community. We just never heard of anything on that kind of scale. To have targeted a big collector like that, in a way that suggested some pretty in-depth planning, and that was spooky all on its own. But then to have tortured them, it was very chilling, and not nearly as chilling as the following day when we had a very unusual-looking visitor stop by our store. I wasn't actually working that shift, but my boss told me the story later. It was a weekday afternoon, so the store was basically empty aside from one of our regulars, when a very unusual-looking customer stopped by. Speaking of regulars, we made most of our money from a very small core group of customers. Occasionally, some random kid and a parent would stop by to take a look at some starter decks from Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! And if it was a first-time visit for most other folks, they usually fit one of several nerdy archetypes. But the day after we heard about the collector getting robbed, the person who walked into our shop did not have the look of your average TCG enthusiast. My boss said the guy looked like he was a mechanic or something. I saw the security camera footage myself and he pretty much nailed it. From what I could tell, the guy had dirty overalls on with a pair of sunglasses covering his eyes and he had short reddish-brown hair. The guy walks up to the counter holding nothing but a thin plastic bag, puts it on the counter and tells my boss that he's got some cards to sell. My boss is a savvy guy, so instead of asking him anything too direct, he asked the overalls guy how long he's been collecting, as a form of non-confrontational information gathering. The guy replied that he wasn't a collector, and that he'd inherited the cards from his brother following his untimely passing. My boss shares his condolences, and then the guy adds that he was trying to get some cash together to pay for his brother's funeral, so he figured that he'd stop by to see if the cards were worth anything. My boss promises to pay him a fair price for anything we could flip and then opens up the bag to check out what the guy had brought in. My boss said the second he opened the bag, his jaw dropped. Inside were a mix of extremely rare Yu-Gi-Oh cards, protected by a mixture of soft sleeves and hard plastic top loaders. There was a Cyberstein card, a Dark Paladin card, 2 Black Luster soldiers, and a Chaos Emperor dragon, just to name a few. And these constituted some of the rarest cards on the market at the time. But strewn among them, my boss starts spotting the likes of a High Priestess of Prophecy card, a number 11 Big Eye, and a Spellbook of Judgment. These were cards that had only been released just months before, and not all in the same set, meaning someone had gone to great lengths and potentially spent a lot of money to be able to secure them all so fast. My boss then started thinking how the guy's dead brother must have been a pretty serious collector. So, in the most polite and respectful way possible, he asked the guy what his brother's name was, since he might have been one of our regulars while he was still with us. The guy dropped a name my boss didn't recognize and then mentioned something about how he wasn't from the area. And that is when my boss starts to realize something. The Yu-Gi-Oh collector that had been robbed just the previous week lived across state lines in Ohio, somewhere outside of Cleveland, I think, but don't quote me on that. Anyways, my boss starts thinking, if he robbed some Yu-Gi-Oh collector, the smart thing to do would be to drive across state lines to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. He then starts to realize that a lot of the cards the guy had brought in that day were the exact same kind that had been stolen from the collector, particularly cards like Madolche Queen Tiramisu. Then slowly but surely he figures out that the story about this guy's brother suddenly passing away was just that, a story. My boss, being the guy that he was, lowers his voice and then tells the mechanic-looking dude something like, "Look, I'm gonna be honest with you, buddy. These cards are worth a heck of a lot of money. A lot more than what we got in store right now, but if you give me until Friday, I can scrape together $5,000 in exchange for every card in that bag. Does that sound like a fair deal?" And the guy smiles, nods his head, and then my boss asks for a name and cell number just in case he needed to contact him. The guy says his name was Ricky, and then gave him some excuse about how he was between cell phones or whatever, but that he'd 100% stop by Friday afternoon to make the sale if we were still down. My boss then shakes the guy's hand, kind of jokingly makes him a promise to come back on the Friday, and then watches him walk out of the shop. He said the next few minutes were pretty surreal. He went back to his computer and reread the post about the collector getting robbed, which I think was written by one of this dude's Yu-Gi-Oh buddies since the collector himself was in the hospital. I saw that big wall of text for myself, and I also saw how it included a pretty comprehensive list of what had been stolen. Presumably, it had already been put together for the benefit of the cops, but it also meant my boss could check the list to make sure it all lined up with what was in the bag. Every card that was in that bag was also on the list of stolen from the collector. Every single one. So what does my boss do? He calls the cops. The officer he spoke to knew nothing about the robbery over in Ohio, so the first thing my boss does is fill him in on the whole backstory. The officer makes sure to get a description of the mechanic-looking guy and asks a few other routine questions, but then my boss informs him of the whole come back on Friday thing. He said there was a pause on the line before the cop asked him in what sounded like disbelief, "You arranged for this guy to return to the store?" Which he had, with a promise of $5,000. The officer then tells my boss that he has to make a few phone calls, but that he'd be in touch by the following morning at the very latest. But then, a few hours later, the cop calls back to tell our boss that he was about to receive a phone call from 2 major crimes detectives who had just been in touch with their counterparts over in Ohio. Basically, our store was about to become the center of an interstate sting operation, and so as not to blow the cops' cover, we had to go over a few things with them so we could play our part correctly. And it was also around about that time that I learned that I'd be working the day of the sting. And so finally, on the Friday morning, I show up to work to find 2 random kids sitting in the manager's office. And I do mean 2 random kids, too. They looked to be high school seniors at the most, but the second I asked who they were, they each flashed me a shiny badge that read State Police. And both cops were in their 20s, and thanks to a fresh shave and some loose hoodies and a few very real late-stage pimples, they looked like the kind of guys that belonged in a TCG store. And before we opened, we went over a few final details, and essentially we were to simply go about our regular duties, and if the suspect showed up, we were to make the sale as planned. Under no circumstances were we to try to get involved in any shape or form, and when the cops made their move, we were to retreat back into the store until it was safe to come out again. No citizens' arrests, no heroics whatsoever. And that was fine by us. I mean, the dude had already tortured someone half to death and, as the cops explained, probably had someone waiting for him in a getaway car since it was two suspects that committed the torture/home invasion, not just one. Anyway, the whole morning, the cops were basically hanging out across the street from the store. Then, right around the early afternoon, they came into the store to start doing their thing, which was basically acting like a pair of very indecisive customers. They stayed for a few hours, too. The suspect didn't show up until around 3:30, so they were pacing back and forth, just hanging out, talking to us about our jobs and the card games and stuff like that. We closed at 5:30, so by the time 3:30 rolled around, we were starting to wonder if the guy was going to show at all. And then out of the blue, in walks the suspect, dressed in those same dirty overalls, wearing the same pair of shades. It got real tense for a few minutes as my boss looked through the cards. Then, when he was done, he essentially gave the two undercovers the go-ahead. I was already stood back near the office trying to look inconspicuous when my boss said, "Hey, thanks for bringing these in, buddy. Let me head back to the office there and get you your cash." Then, right as we're walking into the office, intent on closing and locking the door behind us, we just heard, "State police, let me see your hands." We watched the security camera monitors in the office as the two baby-faced cops approached the suspect with their guns drawn. He didn't even try to escape or put up a fight. He did exactly as he was told, got on his knees, and then they put him on the ground and put the cuffs on him. It was a huge relief for us because we'd very briefly discussed the possibility of a shootout happening, in which case we just have to hit the deck in the office and pray nothing went through a wall. But the arrest itself was actually kind of quick and boring. The guy just did as they said, and I guess because he was so stunned that he'd been bamboozled like that, he just saw these two nerds when he walked in, and then the next, they're yelling at him with guns drawn, saying that they'll shoot him if he even dares to fart. I guess if it were made into a movie, that scene might be a little bit more intense, but like I said, we were super relieved that the situation remained relatively calm. Back in 2014, my family and I moved out of Manhattan and up near this little place called Batavia, which is about halfway between Rochester and Buffalo. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the move, just the one most relevant to the story, and that's how the worst part about moving was losing my bar. So I went to the same place to watch them Yankees for over 8 years, so not being able to stop by whenever I wanted felt like losing a limb. I could drive into the city, maybe take the train if I wanted to visit and have a few beers. But what I really needed to do was find a new booze trap for me to watch sports at, and one that was within walking distance. I ended up having to settle on cycling distance instead, which ended up me riding home drunk more than a few times, but in the end, I found this little place called Johnny's Bar that I could ride out to, with all the same local spot feels my old bar had, just with much cheaper beer. And who needs familiar faces when you got 3 bottles of Bud? Now anyways, I start heading over to this place on game nights just to check it out. The first couple of times were kind of awkward. The people in Johnny's weren't rude, just a little insular, I guess. So it took a few visits for them to really warm up to me. I think Johnny saw the same 6 faces night in and night out for the better part of 2 decades, and one of these faces was at the end of the bar there almost every single time I visited. I didn't really notice just how frequently this guy was there until one Wednesday afternoon when I took a half day at work after a fight with the old ball and chain there. It wasn't anything too vicious, and we kissed and made up by bedtime, but after slamming the phone down on her at work, I took that half day, then rode my bike over to Johnny's to get a beer. And there he was, propping up at the end of the bar, the only other guy in the place. And he's skinny as a rake, balding a little on top, with gin blossoms all over his nose and cheeks, and all he's doing is sitting there, a glass of liquor in front of him, watching the ash of his butt slowly burn down. And I didn't say anything to him at first, just said hi to the bartender and ordered a beer, and then seeing as it's the great unifier, got to talking about how the wife was giving me grief back at home. And then while I'm doing that, I start trying to get our quiet, skinny friend into the conversation. I guess I'm gregarious like that, not wanting to make anyone feel left out, but almost the second after I turned to the guy to basically be like, "Women, am I right, buddy?" The bartender very subtly raises a hand and shakes his head, as if to say, "Don't bother." I didn't want to offend the guy or anything, so I offered up a little apology to the bartender, just by way of politeness, and then carried on the conversation with him alone. At one point, the bartender goes over to the skinny guy, pours him another liquor, and then, a second after turning his back, the skinny guy downs the drink and then just says, "Another one," in a way that was so flat it kinda came off as rude. I figured Skinny and the bartender must have known each other pretty goddamn well if he'd take that kind of talk without comment. And that, or something really crappy had just happened to this guy, which was why I'd been told to leave him alone. The bartender then walks back over to him, but instead of pouring him another drink, he puts the whole bottle in front of him and says that he'll just add whatever he drinks to his tab. The Skinny returns a nod and thanks, and then, over the half hour or so, he finishes the whole bottle, then almost falls off of his stool when it came time to leave. He's only just about made it out the door before he sort of steadied himself and took a deep breath and started off down the grass verge towards wherever he lived at. I waited until the guy was 100% out of listening range, and then I asked the bartender a question in about as diplomatic a fashion as possible, and that question being, what the hell is that guy's problem? The bartender sighed and then just stared off at nothing for a second, like he was weighing up whether or not to tell me. But I think in reality it was more like he was wondering how much he should tell me. And I guess he settled on this. The skinny drunk at the end of the bar, whose name I don't really want to give away, used to be an undercover cop. As soon as the bartender said that, I thought to myself, well, that explains that. I mean, the guy had probably been in some pretty hairy situations, right? We've all seen the movies. Probably had to do a few bumps of blow with a gun in his face or something, terrified his targets, or going to find the wire strapped to his ballsack. But no, this guy wasn't that kind of undercover. He never dressed up or worked on his character like some kind of crazy method actor. He did all of his undercover work from the comfort of some air-conditioned office over in Albany. He didn't physically infiltrate any of the groups that he'd helped bring down. Instead, he did it online. I kind of went from thinking, well, that explains the hardcore day drinking, to how does this guy have advanced PTSD from sending a few emails? But that right there, ladies and gentlemen, demonstrates the sheer vastness of my own ignorance. Because our former undercover cop wasn't busting dorm room pot dealers at NYU or Columbia. No, his job was to infiltrate online pedo rings by posing as someone who shared their disgusting inclinations. From what the bartender said, and to be fair, I've heard this a few places too, undercovers are only supposed to be on the front line for a limited amount of time, what with it being such a high-stress position. Every couple of months you swap your team out for a fresh one and let the spent one rest up and decompress so they're ready to do it all over again. But then, when it came to all the online creepy stuff, things worked slightly different. In regular undercover work, you can't overuse your assets. You can't have one guy who was some meth-slinging biker 5 minutes ago pop up as some mafia associate in the same city just a few weeks later. A lot of the time, when an undercover operation finishes up, you can't use the same people again, especially once criminals start figuring out that there was a rat that they should have been smelling. Only with the online stuff, if your undercover had to burn a profile, they can make up another one in a matter of minutes. Definitely not a cop 69 became swear I'm not 50420, and then we're back on the job cracking into all those evil websites and bringing them down. They still arrested their guys every so often, but it wasn't like they needed to constantly cycle officers around to maintain their covers. And on top of that skinny barfly there was relentless. I don't know if he had some kind of savior complex or if he just knew how good at his job he was, but time and time again, Skinny refuses to go on leave or take any kind of break. He goes back into the meat grinder over and over, boom, 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 uncovering these freaks left and right through gaining their trust, maybe even their friendship, and then getting them to share any material that they had stashed away. Getting them to admit that they were pedos wasn't enough either. You can't just arrest and throw someone in jail just because they said something gross, or at least things don't work that way as far as I know. To get an arrest and a conviction, Skinny had to convince these guys to send them whatever child exploitation pictures they had, and he had to actually look at all this stuff too to make sure it was legitimate, and then another bunch of cops went about tracking down both the victims and the perps. And so, that was Skinny's job, seeing those pictures and talking to those guys, and he did it for years, taking only the odd piece of vacation time here and there so he didn't completely burn himself out. And I guess he was obsessed, but then who wouldn't be? You're taking these scumbags out. But there's still just so many more of them, and every day you take off is one that they're free to carry on doing all their evilness. And I'm not saying I know exactly what this guy was thinking, but that's just my best guess at why he works so relentlessly. And then one day, I guess things just got the better of old Skinny there, and he turns in his badge and just vanishes off the face of the earth. It wasn't actually Skinny who told the bartender all that stuff about him either. Apparently he just showed up one day, ordered himself a drink, and then kept on knocking him back until the cows came home. Next day he shows up, does the same thing all over again. And then aside from the odd vacation that he gave his liver, that guy was in there almost every day, day in and day out, doing his respectable impression of Nicolas Cage in that Leaving Las Vegas movie. You know the one, where the guy drinks himself half to death before someone pulls him out of it. Now anyway, several months go by, and then some stranger comes into Johnny's bar with a picture of Skinny, asking if anyone's seen him. Skinny wasn't there at the time, and everyone was all tight-lipped and first wondering who this guy was, and what does he want with him. The stranger then pulls out a police badge, but instead of appealing to authority, the guy appeals to the patron's sense of common decency. He explains that Skinny was an ex-coworker of his at the state police, that he just disappeared after quitting on them, and that he and his old buddies had been trying to track him down for the better part of 6 months. He explains how he thought that Skinny's drinking was out of control, how they'd been worried he'd driven his car off the Five Arches Bridge or something, and how they just wanted to check in on him to see how he was doing. I think the goal was to get Skinny on the wagon, but by the evidence of my own 2 eyes, after seeing him nearly faceplant after climbing off that bar stool, I can safely say that their efforts were in vain. The bartender then told me that that's all Skinny ever seemed to do. Stop by, talk to no one, get drunk, and then leave. And he did it, because all he wanted in the world was to forget about the things that he'd seen, and the things that he'd said, trying to land those child predator scumbags in jail, where they belonged. I was born in Edgewick, which is an area in the English city of Coventry, and I grew up in the 1970s. Like most kids lucky enough to have their grandparents still knocking about, they were 2 of my favorite people in the whole wide world. My granddad was a fantastic bloke and taught me to fish and shoot pellet guns, but my Nana was an absolute saint. She always had a tray of gingerbread men ready whenever we went round for tea, and she made the best roast potatoes I've ever had, even all these years later. And almost everywhere she went, people would stop her to say hello or would simply say something nice as they walked past her in the street. As a young lad, I didn't really know any better. I just thought Nana was as popular with everyone else as she was with me. But they didn't love her because she made good roasties or baked a cracking apple pie. They loved her for a very different reason. As I learned later on in life, my Nana was a popular and rather famous figure in Coventry because she served as an air raid warden during the Second World War. I imagine not many of your American listeners will know what one of those is, so if you'll excuse a slight diversion, let me explain. During the war, every fit fighting-age man was sent off to the army or what have you, meaning women had to take their places in jobs they wouldn't be traditionally expected to do. You had lady police officers, firewomen, ladies digging through the rubble of bomb sites and helping to rebuild essential infrastructure. And in the case of my Nana, you had lady air raid wardens too. When German aeroplanes started dropping bombs on us, the air raid wardens would go around to make sure everyone was in their shelters. They also went round to make sure no lights were showing, as they did these full citywide blackouts back then to confuse German bombers. So if there were a crack in your curtains and your warden could see light coming from inside, they'd bang on the windows so hard that the glass would almost break, and that was your warning for the night. Anyway, that's what Nana did. Walked around all night making sure everyone stayed blacked out and all that. And anyway, one night Nana's doing her rounds when she hears a scream coming from a good few streets away. As you can imagine, the blackouts meant that the nights back then were deathly quiet, so Nana could hear the scream from quite a distance away. As she was running to investigate, she bumped into another air raid warden, a bloke this time, and as they reached the area they suspected the scream to have come from, they started looking around to locate the source of it. Minutes later, they find her, a young woman, stabbed almost to death in an alleyway. The young woman was rushed to the hospital and she survived her wounds, but everyone agreed that she'd been very, very fortunate to do so. She claimed her attacker had been a very nondescript working-class gentleman wearing an overcoat and cap. They also discovered that the woman was a prostitute, or rather, she wouldn't admit to being one, but there was very little other reason why a woman would be all dressed up and out on her own like that, especially when there was a bloody war going on. She was never about to admit it though, not even so much as to avoid arrest either because of the deep shame associated with it. But that being said, she wasn't the only one who attempted to defy the blackout regulations to ply her trade, and they ended up paying a very similar price. A few nights later, and Nana wasn't there to hear it happening this time, but another young lady was attacked in roughly that same area, just too far for Nana to hear it on her rounds. Again, the woman was suspected to be a prostitute, but sadly, she wasn't as fortunate as the first young lady. Her attacker seemed to have learned a lot from that first attempt, and on his second, he very literally went for the jugular. When all was said and done, the air raid wardens were scared that they had a sort of Coventry version of Jack the Ripper on their hands, and the timing of it was just bloody awful as well. The Germans were raining bombs from the sky, and as grim as it was, that brought a real sense of togetherness to the people suffering from it. So to think this bloke was, how to put it, battling against his own team in the middle of a war, it put the absolute fear of God into people. People said he was a German agent, some commando sent over to terrorize the people. He wasn't that at all, as it turned out, but it gives you an idea of how frightened people were. Anyway, this carries on for a few more weeks until in the end, there were no more prostitutes walking the streets at all after sundown. But then, the psycho still wanted to satisfy his thirst for blood, so after having no luck on one of his hunts, he tries to break into the home of a woman he believed to be alone. Thankfully, the woman wasn't alone, as her husband was in the bath upstairs, and he chased the attacker away without a stitch of clothing on him, which probably added to the shock factor and scared the attacker off. The fact that no one was hurt was no doubt a good thing, but it was a very thin silver lining to a very dark sort of cloud, because If this blackout ripper, as the people have taken to calling him, was willing to break into houses to find a victim, that it wasn't just prostitutes that were in danger. No one was safe. As you can imagine, people weren't happy. They thought the police should have caught the bloke after the first attack, but they'd let him commit 2 or 3 more attacks before he finally went for someone minding their own business in their own home. They were outraged, saying it never should have gotten that far in the first place, and they raised such a fuss that the local superintendent promised to beef up local patrols and hire more air raid wardens to watch the streets. But then, that was no good, was it? The police couldn't very well neglect other areas of the city for a prolonged period of time, and the blackout ripper avoided officers and wardens like the plague. And what's even worse, they couldn't let lady officers or patrol women out on their own, so they had to double up for safety, meaning even though they'd brought in help from other areas of Coventry, it still wasn't enough to cover all the necessary ground. Then that night, when the patrols were supposed to be boosted and everything was supposed to be fine again, the blackout ripper struck again. Some of the prostitutes who had gotten word of the boosted patrols had decided to take their chances out in the street again, and for one of them, that proved a deadly mistake. That night's murder was the most savage yet, and it seemed only a matter of time before the Ripper decided to go kicking down doors again. Something had to be done, or rather, someone had to come up with a plan. And that's when my dear old Nana suggested something incredibly brave. That she would pose as a prostitute, to bait the man into trying to attack her, at which point she could blow very hard on a whistle to summon officers who would be waiting nearby. And you read that right, by the way. They didn't give her a gun, or a club, or anything else she could use to actually defend herself. The police gave her a tiny tin whistle, and then basically told her, "Off you pop, go and catch us a murderer." I think it might have been a bit more of a sophisticated operation than that, but I remember feeling an acute sense of outrage when I found out that they wouldn't give her any kind of weapon. Granted, not even the police were armed with guns at the time, and British police still patrol mostly unarmed, not counting your taser, baton, and CS spray, but back then, they had even less to work with if they wanted to subdue a criminal. But then, the officers standing by to catch the blackout Ripper would be armed with batons. Nana had nothing but her wits, that bloody whistle, and a will to catch the monster that had been preying on the good people of Edgewick. And so one night, Nana makes her way down to the local police station to go over the plan one last time before heading off into the night. Then, down at the station, she dolls herself up in all her finest glad rags, slaps on a load of war paint, makeup that is, and then once all the officers are in their various hiding places, off she goes towards the Cap Martin Road, which was where she'd first posed as bait. She said she was walking up and down for hours, heels clacking on the pavement, but she didn't see so much as a soul, and after a while, Nana started to think that they wouldn't have any luck. Finally, she turned down the back street between Cheverell Avenue and Grandmouth Road and took a little wander down that, not realizing it was a dead end. She then turns back, only to see someone blocking her exit. The figure is about 50 feet down from her, but she knows it's not one of the policemen because he's clearly not wearing that very distinct Bobby's helmet that they were all wearing. Nana said she called out to the man, and she could tell that it was a man by the way he was dressed, but that he didn't reply to her. Instead, he started walking down the back street towards her at a brisk pace, still without saying a word. She sees him reach into his jacket and take something from a pocket, something which he fiddled with for a second before she saw the glint of a blade in the moonlight. Nana's hand went straight for her pocket, straight for that little whistle she'd been given. She knew that there were policemen just a street or two away, so blowing the whistle would have them there in seconds. But as she pulled it from her pocket, the tiny tin whistle got caught on a brass button and it slipped from her grasp. She thought she'd had it. There was no finding that whistle before the bloke reached her, but she's also sort of instinctually kneeled down to grab it back up off the floor. She said she was frozen in terror for a moment, convinced that she was about to die, when suddenly, this wave of defiance rose up in her, and she whipped off one of her shoes and brandished it like a weapon. Nana said this Ripper laughed and asked her, What are you planning on doing with that? But in reply, she told him, and she didn't just say this either, she barked it so loud that people streets away heard her. My name is Warden Eileen Topsbury, and you're bloody well under arrest. That got another laugh from the bloke, and that one a little bit more nervous than the first, and then Nana started screaming something equally loud, things like, I'll have your bloody eye out with this heel if you come near me. And maybe that was a bit more fight than he was used to. But just for a moment, the Ripper hesitated, and the next thing Nana knows, she can see two bobbies coming bombing it around the corner at full pelt, shouting, Oi, you, stop where you are. In that moment, Nana went from behind trapped in the back street with the blackout Ripper to having successfully trapped him in with two approaching officers. The stroke of bad luck turned into a stroke of good luck in the matter of a few moments, and it's a bloody good job too. My mom hadn't been born yet, so if Nana was murdered, there's no mom, no me, and none of my kids either. Since he knew he was boxed in, the Ripper tried to scale a wall to get away, but it was too late for him. The two bobbies grabbed him by the leg, brought him down, and then beat the living shite out of him before they dragged him off to the police station. After that, Nana was a hero. We still got the newspaper clipping from that time too, and she was intensely proud of them, right up until the day she passed away. She was a bit loopy towards the end too, started losing her memory and all of that, but she never, ever forgot the night that she saved Edgewick from the blackout Ripper. If you put a gun to my head and told me that if I didn't tell you the craziest true story you'd ever heard, you'd blow my head off, I'd tell you this one. I used to be an undercover cop here in DC, and my cover was being a street junkie. I was good at it too. Did 3 full stints before they killed off my character, as you could say. And part of the reason I was so good was no different from what makes an Oscar-winning actor. It's all about the way you carry yourself, your mannerisms, or what I always called a person's physicality. For example, for my junkie character, I'd draw in my stomach real tight, like I'm having stomach cramps. And after that, I'd drop my shoulders real low, walk real fast, and pretend to be wiping sweat off my brow or cheeks every so often to add that real sense of authenticity. It was all in the stomach cramps, though. People saw you holding yourself like that, or if I looked like I was going to ask them for change or something, I became the invisible man. It was like my superpower. I saw everything and everyone, but no one saw me. No one except the other street junkies, and by the time I won those guys over, everything else just kind of fell into place. In as few words as possible, my role was intelligence gathering. I'd stay on the job for a few months at a time, really living that lifestyle aside from all the dope and disease, and then I'd take a vacation, tell the junkies I was going to visit my parents out in the country, and then be back on the line again in like a week or two, refreshed, renewed. One of the first major things we accomplished as a task force was closing a violent gang assault case which was connected to the narcotics trade. Now, I won't go into details, but the whole thing was essentially a punishment for a missing package, and it sent shockwaves around the whole city, seeing as the victim was basically a civilian. It means a lot to everyone to send these jerks to federal prison, but little did we know that it would be what they called a Pyrrhic victory. Not long after we put these people in cuffs, the number of bodies being found around DC went up by 500% over the course of about a month, and as you can imagine, the chief of police wanted to know why. Officially speaking, all the deaths were coming up as overdoses, and some suspected a bad batch of heroin was to blame. But then some of the OD deaths were some veteran street junkies, and although junkies tend to be desperate sons of bitches, their vocation relies on them being street smart, not street stupid. And if they know that there's a bad batch going around, they'll try to isolate and avoid it. And by that, I mean find out who's selling it, and then avoid them till it's off the street. But some of the deaths were cats who should have easily known better. Junkies who had all kinds of ways of getting their hands on a fix without having to risk poisoning themselves. My point is, I knew something was wrong almost right away. Not just that there was some bad dope going around. I just had to figure out what. I started doing my usual rounds, not asking too many questions, just putting out feelers like I always did. And that's how I found out it wasn't coming from one particular corner or one particular dealer even, who might have stepped on his product so hard that he didn't mind a few dead addicts. It was coming from everywhere. People were avoiding one dealer thinking it was coming from them, and then they dropped dead after spiking the bag that they got from their safe guy. Rumors were flying around. People were getting scared, and what's worse, they were getting sick from running out of dealers to turn to. We had 4 pharmacy robberies in one day. 4. And that's what I mean when I tell people that in a city like DC, so any city really, everything is connected. And when that rot sets in, it's like mold. You need bleach to get it out, and at times, the BPD looked more like a dry wet wipe than a bottle of Clorox. Anyways, the part when I feel like I fell down was, unlike a lot of the other junkies who were avoiding their regular hookups in an effort to stay safe, I was hunting bags like it was the last batch of dope ever made. I wanted to find whoever was selling that bad dope and get them off the street. Locking junkies up is one thing, but letting them die off in their dozens every week was no part of my job description. Don't get me wrong, street addicts do each other pretty dirty, and you'll meet some real bad ones too. But I'd say around 40% are just good people who made terrible decisions, and some of them I might have even called friends in some other lifetime. And so, as I was saying, I was running around Deanwood trying to find the source of this bad dope. But then, instead of being everywhere, it seemed to be nowhere all at once. And by that, I mean everyone seemed to be able to get their hands on the bad dope when they weren't looking for it. But me, going out of my way to try and get my hands on it, I couldn't seem to find any at all. Every bag of dope I bought went straight into evidence, and after the spike in drug deaths, every other bag was being tested for toxins and whatnot. Not a single one ever came up as hot. Hot meaning fatally poisonous. So as you can imagine, I was starting to get pretty frustrated. Everyone seemed to be able to get their hands on that bad dope, except for me. At least until one day when I finally got my wish. So early one morning, I get myself onto the street and start doing my thing, putting out feelers and asking the junkies who's holding. Eventually, I get hooked up with the one guy I'd been buying from, and we meet in our usual spot to make the exchange. But then, instead of being there on foot or on bike, the delivery guy is in his car, and instead of just giving me the dope and taking the cash, he says something like, "Get in. We gotta go someplace to get it." I'm thinking, okay, this is out of the ordinary, but whatever. And I get in his car and off we go to get the product. We ended up in some trap house, which was to be expected. But what I didn't expect was to be given the bag of dope by someone you might call a lieutenant, i.e. someone who would never regularly involve themselves in direct sales. He didn't just hand me the stuff either. He asked me to sit down in the upstairs bedroom that doubled as their kind of office, and then I was subjected to what I can only describe as a minor interrogation. I didn't get the impression that they were looking for an undercover. It was all minor questions. What's your name? Where are you from? How long you been in DC? That kind of stuff. They wanted to know who I'd been buying from, who I thought had the best product, if I'd never been picked up by the cops. I answered everything as honestly as I could, even the question about being arrested. Me and the boys had faked 1 or 2 arrests while I'd been working, just to give me a little authenticity, so I brought up those times figuring that they could corroborate them if they asked the right people. They asked a few more questions, just seemingly basic stuff, and then after that, they gave me the bag and then told me to get lost. I asked them straight up if the stuff was safe, and they said yeah, that it was like a new package and the old one was off the streets. I didn't take their word for it, and like everything else I bought, the bag went straight to evidence and then on to testing. Testing also takes time, a long time given the backlog of crap the lab has to test, so we didn't get the results until days, sometimes weeks after we sent off samples. Usually that kind of time scale worked for us, but on this occasion, it almost got me killed. The next morning was the same start as usual. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed by 7 a.m., out in the streets by 7:30. Everything went as normal. I did my usual thing, and then come early afternoon, I went to my usual spot outside a liquor store to beg for smokes from people coming out. It was part of a daily effort to establish presence in the area, and part of my routine was harassing the store owner for a free bottle or a free pack of smokes or anything. He never gave me anything, which was fine because I wouldn't be able to take it without catching hell from the higher-ups, but it did big things for my character in terms of establishing that presence and authenticity. Every time I walked into that guy's store, it'd be a case of, "You again, what the hell do you want now?" And that's if he didn't open straight up with, "Get the hell out of my store, you crackhead." But that day, the day after the visit with the lieutenant, I walked into his store to have him address me by my street name. And the thing that really grabbed me was how he didn't know my street name. And if he knew my street name, that meant someone had been talking to him about me. But if that was the case, why was I being talked about? So the store owner calls me by my street name, and right away my guard is up when he tells me that someone is looking for me. I'm posturing like I always did, asking who's looking for me in an aggressive way and adding things like, "You tell whoever's looking for me that I'm right here. I ain't hiding, I'm right here." But then, instead of telling me who was looking for me, the store owner told me that someone had called into the store, as in on a cell phone, and asked for me by my street name. They asked the store owner if he had seen me, and that when or if he did, he was to tell me to call him back, whoever he was. A lot of y'all might think that that's a little too vague to know who was calling, but you gotta understand something. None of my street contacts ever used a phone, and neither did I. Or if I did, it was always a payphone. No true street junkie could get their hands on a cell phone and not try and sell it for drug money, so me having one would have been a dead giveaway that I was undercover. No one who knew me on the street would ever ask me to call them back, and if they did, there was no way that they wouldn't have left a number or a street address or something for me to head up. That meant that whoever wanted to talk to me was from the department, in which case it was probably important if it couldn't wait for the next debrief. I found the nearest payphone. I fished through my spare change to find enough for the call and then placed it directly to our office. I kept in character, used my street name, then the person who picked up passed the phone to the person who tried to contact me, and that's the proverbial crap hit the fan moment. As soon as he picks up the phone, he's like, "Jody, you need to get your ass off the street and you need to do it fast." I asked him what the hell he's talking about, and he says these 5 little words I don't think I'll ever forget. "You should be dead already," he told me, and then repeated that I needed to bring my ass in before I got myself killed. It was like a movie or something. I'm asking him to tell me more, and he says something like, "There's no time, I'll explain later." Anyway, so we coordinate a pickup point, somewhere discreet that didn't involve me hiding in a goddamn dumpster like he'd only half-jokingly suggested. He shows up, I get in his car, and I'm goddamn furious because doing that completely burned my cover. I didn't see anyone see me get in, but that doesn't matter in undercover work. You always assume someone's watching. You either go total immersion, or you might as well assume that your cover's been burned. And for me, there's no in-between, so, as I said, the moment I stepped in my coworker's car, years of work went to crap in the time it took me to buckle up. I told him that he better have a damn good explanation for pulling me out like that. But boy, did he ever. We didn't know it at the time, but narcotics had a mic in the apartment I'd been questioned the day before. And that's how we learned that the baggie had been sold contained what we like to call a hot shot. A hot shot is basically drugs that have been tampered with so that instead of getting you high, they kill you. And following the gang assault arrest, the dealers somehow got wind that one of the street junkies was an undercover cop. In other words, they knew I was there, they just didn't know who I was. And so someone had the bright idea to load up a bunch of hot shots and sell them to whatever street junkie they suspected of being the undercover. They must have murdered at least 50 junkies by poisoning before they finally found out it was me, and the way they did it was kind of genius. They were so effective in murdering their suspected undercovers because no junkie on the planet doesn't shoot up or snort the dope they just bought. So if I bought the bag and I was still alive, that was because I hadn't taken the dope I bought from them. And the only reason I wouldn't do that is because I was an undercover cop. The surveillance team heard the dealers put a green light on me with their own ears. They used my cover name and everything. They heard how I must have been an undercover because I clearly hadn't taken the hot shot they'd given me. And at the time I was picked up, there must have been like 100 little hoppers running around with pistols in their waistbands, just hoping to run into me so they could ice me and enjoy the reputation boost associated with that. And what I'm trying to say is, I should not be alive right now. To outsiders, it seems like the system worked. Surveillance heard my cover name, got in touch with the boss, and then that started the frantic effort to get a hold of me before I ended up with several bullet holes in my face. But the probability of that all happening exactly as it should, it's like winning the lottery of life. Surveillance didn't know my cover name, so if the dealers hadn't talked the whole thing out and explained exactly why they knew that I was undercover, the call wouldn't get made. If I didn't stop by the store for some reason at that exact time, the call doesn't get heard and I'm dead within an hour. I could have got shot on my way to the pickup, shot as I was getting into the car. I'd gone over it in my head like 1,000 times, and in every scenario, I don't make it out alive. But then somehow, by the grace of God Almighty, I made it out of there. And I'm not a religious person, and I kind of admire people that do have faith, but after some of the crap I've seen, I can't bring myself to share it, no matter how hard I try. And that's why I don't talk about guardian angels or any of that stuff, and I talk about the lottery. I don't need to believe in angels to appreciate how awesome, literally awesome it is. Everything fell right into place for me. That circumstance and coincidence aligned and saved my life. I know my angels. I met them. They're my coworkers, and I owe them everything. Back in 2011, I did a week of guest lecturing at UMSL, and since I was still a young maverick back then, I was content to surf the couch of an old friend who happened to be working there after attending the same university. We were still in our late 20s, so we were holding down jobs and being fairly responsible, but still staying up until 3 a.m. on the weekend, playing stoned Wii Sports until we got hungry enough to want to eat. At which point, we'd head over to the local 24-hour Walmart to grab whatever looked good. He worked late shifts, and almost all my lectures were scheduled for the afternoon, so we stayed up almost every night, either just hanging out, watching movies, or playing Wii. Then, on the fourth night of our little ritual, my buddy gets home from work, we smoke up, play some more Wii Sports, and then made our way over to the Walmart to get some food. We're walking up and down the aisles with a basket, throwing in pizzas and wings and whatnot, but then, when we got to the snack aisle, we found ourselves in a minor disagreement over which chips to buy. We basically ended up standing there having some dog-brained debate on which Ruffles were the superior flavor, when I start to notice this dude at the end of the aisle on our right. And I noticed him because he wasn't looking at the chips. He was looking directly at us. You know when you can see someone looking in your direction, but you don't want to make any eye contact with them, so you kind of just check them out in your peripheral vision, but refrain from meeting their gaze? It sounds oddly specific, I know, but I'm sure some of you will know what I mean when I say that. I didn't look directly at this dude, but I also knew for certain that he was looking at us. Not just a glance either. He was staring at us. I turned to my buddy and I was about to say, "Get a load of this guy," when I saw a second dude standing at the opposite end of the aisle, who was doing the exact same thing. Now, I did end up making eye contact with the second guy, purely by accident, but he only glanced at me for a second before I recognized that he wasn't strictly looking at me. He was looking past me, at the first guy I'd spotted, who was standing to my right. And that's when I turned back to the original dude to see if he really was checking out this other guy, and not me and my buddy, and lo and behold, he was indeed looking at this seemingly random dude. Keeping in mind that I'm just completely toasted at this time, it took me a second to realize what was going on, and that there weren't just these two random dudes staring at me from each end of the aisle. They were having some kind of weird staring competition, and at first I didn't realize just what that meant. But the second the guy on my right reached into his waistband, and I saw this flash of jet black against his bright red boxers, everything I'd been slow to pick up on hit me all at once, and I just remember dragging my buddy to the floor as the shots started popping off around us. I instinctively tucked my head in and squeezed my eyes shut after hitting the floor, so I didn't see anything of what happened next. All I heard was the shots, or more specifically, the crazy echoing they made as the sound waves bounced all over the store. Then, while the shots were like whop, 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 just this weird sound, I had my buddy in my left ear screaming, "What the F? What the F and F?" And we just lay there until everything finally went quiet, ears ringing, and by that point my buddy had gone quiet too. Probably one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life, right there, thinking one of my best friends in the entire world had been shot dead. Thankfully, he just finally decided to shut up and stop screaming, but that moment of thinking, "Oh God, please no," probably one of the worst ones of my entire life. I remember just helping my friend up, and then we saw one of the employees running for a fire exit, and we followed. And then the next thing, we were in the parking lot, hearing one siren turn into two and then double again, and then before we knew it, there were like half a dozen cop cars all pulling into that Walmart parking lot in twos and threes. The parking lot was just completely filled with blue and red lights as the cops ran into the Walmart through the front entrance. But by that point, I think both shooters were long gone. I don't remember seeing any blood either. I mean, not that we were looking, but the point is, I'm not sure that they even hit each other. And I read later that you don't even start gushing blood after being shot, that it sometimes takes a second for the bleeding to really kick in, depending on where the wound is. So maybe they did hit each other and I just didn't see any of it. I actually did a disturbing amount of research into small caliber shootouts after that whole incident too, and all under the recommendation of the therapist that Yushai provided me with. They were great providing me with paid leave, as I'm not gonna lie, being in public places was pretty nerve-wracking for a while after that shooting. The thing that really got me was how lucky we'd been not to have been hit in the crossfire. And I'll put it this way. We had to talk to the cops afterwards to give them a description of both shooters, so we got a pretty good breakdown of what had actually happened. I guess these two gangbangers managed to pepper that entire aisle with 14 bullets that went everywhere. But then somehow, by the grace of God, neither of us were hit. It's still something that I think about from time to time. Like whenever I drive past a Walmart someplace, it's guaranteed to pop into my head if I ever have to visit one for any reason. And I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spotted the guns in time, or if we hadn't been so lucky in regard to where the bullets ended up. The single worst shift I ever worked during my time at Walmart was on Mother's Day of 2015. I was working customer service and handling the day as best as could be expected on a Sunday holiday where the employees were mostly female mothers. That meant we had 13 call-outs and 5 no-call, no-shows, and resulted in us having just 5 overworked women to handle the whole Sunday. Lines were long, but we had zero help. Management couldn't spare anyone. At one point, I'm getting yelled at by a blue-haired old woman about the lines when I get the call that made me regret waking up that day and coming to work. "Hey, see that kid in the orange shoes to your left?" Someone asked me over my radio. "Stop him." I did as I was told, but also asked why. Like if the kid's mom was looking for it or something. And then I hear in reply, he crapped himself and is tracking feces all over. I'm trying to find his mother on the cameras right now. And my heart sunk. The kid was absolutely covered in it, and I felt horrible for this little guy, but I had to do everything in my power not to puke as I led him over to the customer service desk. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes went by, and I saw our head of security approaching customer services. He'd been looking for the kid's mom, so I asked him if he'd found her yet. He just walked right past me without a word, with this weird kind of zapped out look in his eyes. The second security guy, the one who'd been watching the cameras, he came out to watch the kid while I went to mop up all the poop. And there was a lot of it, so it took me a while, long enough so that the next time I walked by the front of the store, I saw our head of security talking to a cop outside. The kid's mom had left him in our toy section to try and distract him before she went into our bathroom to shoot up the heroin overdose that killed her. And I don't think that she meant to end her own life, just in case that came out kind of wrong there, and I think it was accidental. But yeah, she was dead on the scene in our bathrooms. The paramedics took her body away, and one of the cops stayed with us as we watched the kid until CPS showed up. We washed him down, cleaned him up, gave him some new clothes, and then off he went with the social worker. I wanted to quit after that shift more than any other I ever worked, but I stayed. For a whole nother year, actually, and it'd take a hell of a lot for me to go back to a place like Walmart for employment. I saw the most messed up thing I ever saw in my life at the York Commons Walmart in Dayton, Ohio. I was near the pharmacy section, like not at the pharmacy section, but in one of the aisles where I could see it, when some guy walked past me who smelled like a dead skunk's asshole. I didn't realize where it was coming from at first. Like he walked past me, I suddenly smelled this god-awful stench, and I started to look around to see where it was coming from. I figured the guy might have farted as he walked past me, which isn't anything to start a fight with him over, but still, who the hell does that? But then as I'm looking at him thinking, Jesus Christ, dude, eat a goddamn salad every once in a while, I started to notice how he's not exactly very well put together. In fact, and I hate to sound like an insensitive jerk here, but he had a distinct air of homelessness about him. And so then, out of pure morbid curiosity, I decided to just stay put and see what this weird guy would need from the pharmacy. I'm not particularly proud of myself for feeling that urge, and now that I'm typing it out, it's really hitting me how weird that behavior is from people, and the same thing that makes them just stare at car accidents, I guess. But anyway, I watch as the homeless-looking guy waits in line to talk to the pharmacist, and the person in front of him clearly starts to smell him too, because she turned around and gave him this look that said, "Take a goddamn bath already." She then took her pills or whatever and stepped away, and the stinky homeless dude steps up to the counter to ask for pills for his butt leakage or whatever was going on. And that's legit what I thought was happening too. Like, I guess I just couldn't conceive what that guy might have been going through. And in my dumb, ignorant brain, stinky meant poo-poo, and with my total lack of medical knowledge, I could never have guessed just how horrifying the situation actually was. And Jesus H. Christ, was it horrifying. So I'm watching this homeless-looking dude talking to the pharmacist, whose eyes must have almost been watering because of how close he was. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but the dude looked like he was asking the pharmacist questions and the pharmacist couldn't quite understand him. The next thing I know, that guy is leaning down, grabbing a hold of the pant leg and rolling it up real carefully all the way up his boot and past his sock. The pharmacist leans over the counter, kind of looking down at him from what I'm guessing was like a slightly raised platform on the other side. Then when the homeless dude pulls his pant leg up a little more and reaches flesh, both me and the doctor pull back in horror. I'm maybe 15 to 20 feet away, so I can't see this guy's leg up close. But even from that distance, I could tell from the color of his leg that he had some kind of serious infection going on down there. And that's when it really hit me. The bad smell wasn't coming from this guy's mouth or armpits or butt. It was coming from this guy's leg wound, which was so badly infected that it must have been rotting from the inside out. I remember the pharmacist, covering his mouth right away after seeing it. I didn't see him gag or anything, but he sure as hell looked like he was pretty close to. He then talked to the guy in a higher volume, not talking to him in a polite way, but giving him a direct order. "You need to go to the hospital right now," he kept saying. I don't know what the homeless dude said back to him, but the pharmacist's eyes went all wide again as he repeated himself, "Sir, listen to me. You need to go to the hospital right away. This is very serious." And I couldn't just stand by at that point. I suddenly became very self-aware that I was just standing there, watching this all unfold, being one of those insensitive jerks who just stares at the 4-car pileup and doesn't offer to help or anything. I walked over, and I did the only thing I could think of. I asked the guy if he wanted me to call him an ambulance so he could get some actual medical assistance for his leg, and he kept saying no. But the pharmacist spoke right over his head "Yes, sir, you should do that. This man needs an ambulance." I remember reaching into my pants pocket to get my phone, then looking down at its screen, and that's when I caught a glimpse of this dude's leg close up. It was rotten. Actually rotten. So rotten that I'm pretty sure that I could either see this dude's shin bone directly at the bottom of the open wound, or there was some kind of muscle membrane or something that was pale and I mistook it for bone. Then, as I was looking at it, I really started to smell it again, and it was so bad that I had to cover up my mouth and nose with my shirt to stop myself from gagging right in front of the dude. The guy kept telling me, "Please don't call anyone," but I just totally ignored him. I don't know if he had drugs on him or if, a buddy of mine suggested he had outstanding warrants or something, but there was no way in hell that I was about to walk out of that Walmart without at least having done something for the guy. I guess I felt guilty for my first thoughts being, "Who's this stinky jerk?" and then realizing, oh, shoot, this dude might be dying right in front of me. So I figured the least I could do is call the guy an ambulance so I could walk out thinking that I actually did something, or tried to do something anyway. But in the end, he stopped protesting and just walked out. The pharmacist and I were calling after him "Hey, you can't just leave," but he did. He just up and walked out like he was fine. But he was definitely not fine, not according to the pharmacist anyway. He said it was a miracle the guy was even on his feet, that he had to be on some serious painkillers or have an addiction to numb all that pain, because a regular person would literally be screaming in agony if they were walking around with that kind of wound on their leg. The pharmacist said the guy would probably die soon, at least if he didn't get to a hospital as fast as possible. I want to hope that he did, but a part of me just kind of knows that he didn't, and that he was just one of those homeless dudes that dies, disappears, and doesn't even get so much as a funeral to mark their passing. About 10 years ago, I was laid off from my job and I needed money to pay the bills, so I swallowed my pride and I took a job at Walmart until I could find something in my preferred field. I ended up working in the lawn and garden section, which is actually fun when you get to play with plants all day long. However, I wasn't aware that lawn and garden also does all of the holiday setup, as well as placing said holiday product on the floor. Fast forward to a week before the public school systems were in session, I had a cart full of notebook paper, pencils, trapper keepers, all that kind of stuff that I was trying to put on the shelves when a sound ripped through my eardrums that was similar to ones that are typically only heard on the Discovery Channel. The best I can describe it is cats being lit on fire by their tail and being chased by rabid wolves. I looked around to figure out just who in the hell was being murdered in the store when I saw him. There was a kid, about 8 years old, who looked as if he was desperately trying to become Jabba the Hutt, and the kid was succeeding. It took me a minute to figure out what the hell was going on in my aisle until I realized that this kid was throwing a fit because his parents wouldn't buy him 3 different Trapper Keepers, one of which was Hello Kitty. Normally, I'd just shrug and say, typical Saturday in Walmart, but no. This little brat realized that his dad wasn't paying attention to him and was instead focused on his siblings. This pisses the kid off even more, since he howls with rage and, here's where it gets insane, kicks his what looked like 8 months pregnant mother directly in the stomach. And to her credit, this lady didn't whomp this spoiled little monster's butt right in the aisle. No, she instead collapsed on the floor and had to be taken away by paramedics. And then in the commotion, that little brat took that as a sign that he could have all the Trapper Keepers he originally wanted. I watched this whole thing go down, and as the dad watched his wife get loaded into an ambulance, not one iota of, "you're gonna get it later," came from him. Instead, the little brat that kicked his mom started crying about being hungry and wanting chicken nuggets, which the dad then took him to go get, I think. And I swear, it's places like Walmart where you see the lowest of humanity sometimes. It's not even the place itself, it's just everyone goes there. And I saw and dealt with some amazing customers during my time there, but I also saw the absolute dregs of society too. And sometimes if it didn't do some terrible things to my soul. This might sound kind of funny to some people, but I can promise you it was not funny in the moment. I used to work at Walmart, and one day I'm walking the aisles when I suddenly spot this lady opening up a bottle and chugging the contents. Now this made 0 sense to me at the time because I knew the store pretty well, and the place where the lady was standing was the place that I was pretty certain we kept all the hot sauce. But then, she couldn't have just been chugging the hot sauce, could she? Well, she was. I walked up to her and I said something like, "Excuse me, ma'am," and just the sight of her must have had my jaw dropping. She had bloodshot eyes, tears streaming down her face, and she was wheezing, or like breathing really heavily from how bad it must have been burning her mouth. She was sweating, gasping, and it was just a really crazy thing to see. Like, people have joked when I've told them this story saying, "Oh, she just loved hot ones," or whatever. But when I say that this woman was trying to hurt herself with hot sauce, I mean that legitimately. She kept drinking and drinking. I called security, and by the time security came, she was almost bent double over in pain from what it was doing to her stomach. Security just sort of dragged her outside, and she just laid there until someone called 911, and then the EMTs came and took her away. I used to think about her a lot, like hoping that she was doing better, and I still do. She seemed very sick in the head. I worked at Walmart several years ago when a coworker's ex-husband came in with a gun. He owned a failing business and had committed insurance fraud 3 times. The wife said she had no idea he was committing arson and filed for divorce. The ex-husband was angry at her for testifying against him, and he asked her why she wouldn't talk to him. She asked him to leave, and then he told her he had a gun. For some reason, she ran into the women's restroom at the front of the store to hide. He followed her there and had her on her back while he sat on top of her, straddling her. He was crying and saying his life was over and all this. Another person happened to be in the bathroom, but he let her go unharmed. They evacuated the entire store while the cops set up. And the cops finally said that they were coming in just to talk, and he shot at the cop and missed, and the bullet went through the door. He said he knew that he was going away for the rest of his life for shooting at a cop, and he said he was sorry and he loved her, and then shot himself in the head. while still sitting on top of her. They had to move his body off of her to help her get up and out. She wasn't harmed, but she's still in therapy to this day. And we were pretty good friends at the time, and it still scares me because I would have never have thought her husband was capable of that. I was helping direct traffic at an event in a Walmart parking lot when I started to hear a man shouting about 25 to 50 feet away from me. I couldn't really tell what was going on, so I kept directing traffic a few more minutes until I realized his family had locked themselves in the car, seemingly in fear of him, and he was intoxicated, cussing and screaming, not only scaring them, but the hundreds of people and families walking through the parking lot. I calmly approached him and told him I understood that he must be going through a stressful situation, and I asked if I could help resolve things. He looked at me with this fire in his eyes and told me that I better not get in between him and his family. I tried to reassure him that it wasn't my intention, only to try and calm him down, and I just wanted to help. Things escalated verbally, but I was able to guide him about 20 feet away from the family car while we were talking. The wife/girlfriend saw this as her opportunity to drive away, but before she could, he jumped on the hood of the moving car. I had no time to think and just jumped in front of the car. Thoughts of her plowing other families over while driving with him on the hood flashed into my head, and I just reacted in that moment. She stopped and I talked him off the car while he threatened me more and radioed for help. Should have sooner, but things escalated quicker than I thought they would. In the next 10 minutes, before help arrived, he got one of the doors open and was trying to pull a 2-year-old boy out of his car seat while I tried to pin him into the open door and prevent him from getting the boy. 2 random dads saw what was happening and helped me keep him corralled until my help arrived. I let them take over so I could go back to directing traffic, which went a little haywire in the preceding 15 minutes. Before long, I heard yelling behind me and saw him hit one of the other security guards, and then 2 guards and the guy all grabbing onto each other in some scuffle. I ran over and we took and held him down firmly but safely for about 15 minutes until police arrived and arrested him. I received a subpoena, but he pled before the trial, and I never learned what happened before or since. I just hope that family is okay. I was guarding at a Walmart that had been gutted and used to store construction equipment for a construction company. I literally just sat in my car and circled the building and didn't have to answer to anyone or have anyone check up on me. One night I'm sitting in my car facing the building, and out of the shadows, a woman walks towards the front of the building. She had no shoes on, short pajama-style shorts, and a thin white spaghetti-strap top. It was like 37 degrees, so immediately I'm like, what the hell? And watch her for a while. I noticed that she was very alert and checking her surroundings, constantly, like her head was on a swivel, and then all of a sudden, she darted behind a concrete column at the front of the building. A Honda had just pulled into the lot and she noticed it before I did, and she was keeping the column between the car and her, and the car was creeping slow, like they were looking for someone, and as it drove past her, she shifted so they couldn't see her behind the column. At this point, alarm bells are ringing in my head and I get out of the car. The Honda leaves the area and she sees me. She knows I see her and she starts running over. I ask, "Do you need help? Are you okay? What's going on?" She just tells me to call the cops and she's scared, crying. I don't know how to describe it. It's not crying from sadness or anything. It's like pure terror, tears, and gasping. I start calling the cops, and that Honda rolls back into the parking lot, and instantly she's like, "Oh, never mind, it would be better if you don't get it involved." and starts walking to the car like she's just been found out. After that, she got in the car, and that was that. It's been like 3 years and I still think about it. Was it human trafficking? An abusive boyfriend? I have no clue. But my blood runs cold when I stop and remember about that night, and I hope she's okay, but I doubt it. One time, I was at a tailgating party in a Walmart parking lot, and the place was pretty crowded. Dude comes up beside me and isn't really looking to get a drink, he's just kinda looking at me really intensely. Really big guy, probably 6'3", 220 plus pounds of just muscle. I'm like 6 foot, maybe 160, rail thin. And he nonchalantly starts talking about how his favorite thing on a night out is just to punch an absolute random person and see their lights go out, laying on the floor. He says he does it when he's coked out, which he insinuated he was, and just goes on and on about the thrill that he gets from knocking someone out who he doesn't even know. The things he said were probably more graphic and violent than I remember. I was just like, what the heck, dude? I need to get out of here. I'm not sure how the conversation turned out, but he mentioned that he was out on the town because he went through a breakup. And he said, "Are you my bro?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, man. We're buds." And I got my drink and said something like, "Cheers to ya, to all the fish in the sea," or something like that. And I got back to my friends and kept that guy in the corner of my eye all night long. I work at Walmart and we tend to get a lot of interesting customers. One day a man came in and I, being a cashier, went to serve him. He stood at the counter for about 10 seconds without looking at me and then proceeded to run out of the store. Cut to about 2 hours later, I'm cleaning the men's bathrooms when he walks in. I apologize and say that I'll just be a moment to finish up my cleaning. When I went to exit the bathroom with my cleaning supplies, he blocked the doorway and wouldn't let me pass for about 10 seconds again. He then spends half an hour in the bathroom before exiting the store without purchasing anything. An hour later, you guessed it, he's back again, pacing back and forth at the front of the store, and he ends up buying like $30 worth of stuff and then leaves the store without it, and just never returns. Several weeks later, I'm waiting for my bus. I live very close to work. When he sees me, I see him, and he walks up and stands next to me for that 10-minute wait. When the bus finally arrived, he turned around and walked away. Now, as a young woman, this scared the crap out of me, particularly when I drove past him getting arrested a couple of weeks ago, surrounded by police officers. There was this random man who happened to be outside when I was visiting a Walmart a few years back. He was disheveled, short, I want to say maybe 5'1" to 5'3", bald, mumbling to himself and walking very funny. When I got to be about 3 feet from him, he turned around and knocked out the lady directly behind him. A perfect stranger on her phone, and he knocked her out with one solid punch to the face. Then he ran up to a guy who was easily a foot taller than him and tackled him to the ground and began headbutting him and yelling, "Can you feel this now, Mary? Can you?" It was psycho. And by the time the cops showed up, this guy was foaming at the mouth from yelling, covered in blood, and 2 other people, 2 older men, had been assaulted by him. It was so nuts. The guy was obviously on some pretty strong stuff, but I've never seen anyone before or after that just lose it quite like that. I used to work for Walmart corporate, and we all had to go to this event one time. We all met up in Miami and took two 15-passenger vans to drive up to Central Florida, both full. We took US 27 known as Okeechobee Road. At some point before sundown, we stopped at a McDonald's for dinner. My buddy from back then was there too, and I remember chatting it up with him, just typical teenage stuff. I remember at one point we were in separate vans, and we started loading up when one of the instructors decided that my buddy and I should switch vans. I was confused, but sure, didn't matter to us. I sat in his seat and he went to the other van, and then last minute, the instructors decided that we should switch back to how we were. I never quite figured out why, but it saved my life and ended my friends. A couple of hours later, it's dark. US 27 has no lights at the time, and their van was behind us the whole time till it just suddenly wasn't. We were 6 miles from our destination when we got a call from the driver of the other van. We were in an accident. We're hurt. We sped back at like 100 miles per hour, only to be met by a literal wall of semi-trailers blocking the 2-lane highway. We had to drive on the shoulder to get past them. As we went around these trucks, I noticed that they all had their headlights on. Illuminated on the road was my friend's body. His eyes were open, but all you could see was the whites of his eyes. His arms were very obviously broken at odd angles, but most alarming of all, he was torn completely in half. To say that we were beside ourselves is an understatement. The van was laying on its side, completely mangled, and the rest of the passengers were bloodied and bruised, but aside from a broken arm, they were generally okay. According to the driver, they hit wet pavement on a curve, lost control of the van, and it flipped. My friend was wearing a seatbelt, but he was pretty skinny. He slipped through the belt and broke through a passenger side window. He flew approximately 30 yards over the grass median and landed on the opposite side of the highway. According to the driver, she was trying to climb out of the flipped van when she witnessed my friend trying to push himself up with his arms. An SUV was driving on the lane that he was laying in. It hit him and killed him instantly. The SUV did not stop. They never found out who hit him, and it sticks with me 17 years later. I try to be grateful for the life I have. I was going to be in his seat, and happenstance saved me. I struggle with feeling like I deserved it. He was one of the good ones, and I was always struggling with my inner demons. And I miss you, man. I hope you're all right wherever you are. Rest in peace. I had a stalker situation. I used to work at Walmart, and while I was working one time, a guy came in and just said hi. He knew my name, I sort of recognized him, and he said he went to high school with me. And then it clicked, and I remembered seeing him back in school. We talked for a bit, and he seemed nice enough. The next day, I got a friend request on Facebook. I added him and didn't think anything of it. Now, a few days later, some of the guys I'm friends with on Facebook sent me a message asking who he is, because he's sending them all friend requests. I never kept my phone number on Facebook, but he somehow got it. He started texting me and calling me. He got my email as well. Sent me this long letter about how he always loved me, wants to marry me, and how perfect we were for each other, asking who all the guys are I'm friends with, and that it should just be me and him. It really took me off guard since we only talked for the first time a few nights ago. I responded nicely and I tell him that I have a boyfriend and that it seems like he's a nice guy, but that I just didn't feel that way about him. That we just don't know each other well enough. And that was a bad choice of words. He starts showing up everywhere I am. Classes, when I'm shopping, eating, everywhere. If I don't see him, he sends me emails about if I enjoyed this here with this person, and I finally tell him that he needs to just leave me alone. He sends me this long-winded email about how I'll pay, how I just didn't give him a chance and he will make me give him one. And what a selfish bee that I am. Really creepy, just terribly mean stuff. About how he knew my schedule and my routine and there was nowhere that I went that he couldn't find me. I eventually ended up calling the police and actually getting a restraining order, and he did get into some trouble, but not very much. I was scared for a while after that, but thankfully I've not heard from him since. So this short story is regarding a former coworker of mine at Walmart who seemed as though he took extreme pleasure in violence. You see, one time, he put on a football helmet and ran into the break room and just head-butted me extremely hard with it, and I actually ended up with a concussion. And when I told my manager, he confronted me at work. He shoved me down, got on top of me, and I kept screaming and kicking at him, telling him to get off of me and that I couldn't breathe. Eventually he did, but Jesus Christ, I actually thought he was going to kill me. Thankfully, he ended up getting fired, but I spent the rest of my time working there wondering if he was ever going to come back and finish the job. I used to work at a Walmart where the managers didn't care about their staff. I've since learned that they were fired, so that's something. But the customers were always the worst part. We had this one regular, pretty huge guy who would consistently cross boundaries with me. He would try to grab me whenever he was with his buddies, and he would grab my butt, even after I straight up yelled at him and even slapped him once. I begged the managers to ban him from the store, but that didn't happen. The best that they would do would kick him out if he went too far, which usually involved him grabbing me in some way. He was always free to return the next day, though, because he was a good customer. One Saturday, I was on my cigarette break in the alley beside the store when that jerk sneaked up and grabbed me around the waist and started to drag me backwards. I immediately went into fight or flight mode and smashed my head backwards into his face, ended up breaking his nose pretty badly. And when he dropped me, I laid on the ground and kicked up into his groin several times. When I had a moment to think and realized who it was who had attacked me, I took my lit cigarette and I put it out on his arm. I think I did a fair bit of screaming and I spat on him as well. I was just so angry and afraid that I don't have a very clear memory of the rest of that day. I guess the security guys arrived at some point and the cops were called. When the cops came, I gave my statement and he did get arrested. I quit that job and never returned to that crappy place. I never got a chance to find out what happened to the guy or even what his motivations for grabbing me were because I moved to Austin a few months later. It was late at night and I was driving out of a Walmart parking lot. On the way out, someone tried to cut me off when I was making a turn, which almost resulted in our cars crashing. The other driver was very upset and started following me, flashing his lights to blind me. Then, they forced me to park my car and blocked it. He got out with another guy, grabbing a screwdriver and tried first to open my car door, which I locked just in time, and then he tried smashing my window. I wasn't so foolish as to get out of my car and risk being stabbed, so I reached for my phone and started calling a few of my buddies who lived nearby. Some strangers started running over too. The guy with the screwdriver and his friends saw that they were going to be outnumbered and quickly escaped in their car. Overall, it was a very scary experience, and I'm pretty sure if I hadn't locked my door in time, I would have had a huge screwdriver plunged directly into my neck. I used to work with this guy at Walmart who I refer to simply as Josh. Josh was insane. I don't mean he was a really bad drunk and did crazy stuff, or that he was big and a lover of kicking people's butts a lot. He was all of those things, but so much more. Josh used to take full packs of Caricidin nearly daily, at least that's what it seemed like. He took it and would turn his entire mouth red, and he would be at school high as balls. And he sewed his lips shut for a Halloween party with a needle and thread and bled all over the place. And he shot himself on more than one occasion. Once in the leg with a rifle just to see how it felt, and the other time with a handgun in his head in an attempt to take his own life. It didn't work. He's still alive and almost exactly the same. No effects other than now he gets seizures. And he headbutted a cop. Now, one time I lent him a CD and he accidentally broke it. He came back to me apologizing and whipped out this obnoxiously large wad of money from his pocket that was just thick with $100 bills and handed me a fresh hundy from it. Now, I'd like to take a break in these little bullet points about his life to say, Josh was a mentally disturbed individual. This is true. But he was actually a good guy in his own way. He liked me a lot, actually. Anytime someone would mess with me and he'd hear about it, he'd instantly get incredibly mad and want to kill them. To some, he was a violent psychopath. To others, he was a violent, deranged, messed up human being with an unmistakable sweet side. He was completely delusional. He used to tell me about how the doctors took pieces of his body out and replaced them with alien parts to see how he'd operate with them. Honestly, and I'm not joking, I could write a novel based on my experiences with this weirdo. I avoided hanging out with him because I knew that he ended up getting me in some serious trouble, not to mention that he scared the crap out of me. But he always seemed to go out of his way to try and hang out with me, chat with me, whatever. And I have no idea how he managed to hold down that job, but he did, and everyone knew that he was nuts. Years after, he added me on Facebook, and he still sends me the occasional message and always buys my music when I release something new or comes to shows. He's a good dude to have on your side, I think, but he's seriously terrifying. I'm 27, my husband is 30, and our daughter is 1. This story happened last night, so I'm running off like 2 hours of sleep, and my daughter wasn't into the idea of sleeping in this morning. Now, to start, my husband, our 1-year-old, and myself live in a rental and have been here for 3 years now. When we first moved in, there was a random doorbell that would go off. There isn't a doorbell here that we can see, and we thought that there was probably a battery-powered doorbell stored in the attic that is probably dying or malfunctioning. That eventually stopped and we forgot about it for the most part. My husband also used to see what he called shadow people and hear footsteps and have horrible sleep paralysis dreams. I always chalked it up to his mind playing tricks on him or him trying to scare me. It's been a few years since any of that has happened though, and for the year that our daughters live with us, 0 spooky things happened until last night. My husband works the night shift, so it's just me and the baby most nights. Well, last night my daughter wakes up around midnight, so I get her and bring her to my bed. She's back asleep and I'm wide awake scrolling through Hulu. As I'm searching for a show to watch, I kid you not, the foot of my bed, frame, and all lifts like half a foot off the ground and slams back down. My daughter is still asleep, but I'm immediately frozen in fear. My first thought is, there is someone under my bed, but I quickly realized that I couldn't even fit under my bed, so this is far-fetched but not any better. I quickly scoop my daughter up, football style, stand on my bed and jump off the bed as far as possible and run out of the room. I grab our gun, call my husband, shaking and sobbing to please come home, and then call my mom to pick us up. We're a one-vehicle family. At that point, our kitchen lights start to dim until they were completely off, which was the last straw for me. I took my daughter and went to the front yard in only a t-shirt and panties until my husband got home about 10 minutes later. He did a sweep of the house and nothing seemed out of place, which weirdly only made me more scared, like I would rather a stranger be under my bed than some invisible force. But I still went to my mother's. I finally fell asleep about 3:30 and my husband picked us up at 5 a.m. when he got off of work. I'm afraid to sleep here, so I've been awake ever since. I don't know how I'm going to be here alone at night anymore. I'm trying to debunk what happened and find an explanation, but I just can't. It may not sound scary to you, but I had never felt so scared in my life, and scary stuff is 10 times worse when you have a baby to protect. What do I do? How do I bless my home correctly without making things worse? Also, I don't drink or do any drugs, so it's not like I was tripping or something. My mom is a paranormal buff, and my husband and I agreed after one too many crappy spouses and scary movies to always believe each other when we say something is up, so they both believe me, but I still feel crazy. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my mother and I were on a routine grocery run to our local Walmart. I remember getting out of the car and walking up to the entrance. We had parked sort of in the back, so we had a little walk to the front. As we walk up, I see a homeless man asking for change from every person that walks by. He asks the woman in front of us for change, and as she turns him down, he scoffs and begins to say something rude towards the woman. My mother and I walked past him with haste to avoid conflict as he seems to be extremely agitated. We get inside and get our groceries and everything seems fine. As we load up and begin to leave, I remember my mother pulling out $2 to specifically give the man as he is presumably still at the entrance begging. My mother, trying to avoid conflict, wants to hand him the money and be on her way so we don't end up getting harassed as the woman before us did. As we walk out, I raise my arms to my mother in little kid fashion to be picked up as I'm scared of the encounter we're about to have with the man. My mother picks me up and we begin to leave the store. Before the man can ask us for money, my mother hands him the cash and we walk away conflict-free. I'm being held by my mother at this point with my head facing behind her. As we're about halfway to our car, I look up from the pavement and look at the man whom is staring directly at me with the most sinister face. At this point, his features seem distorted and what I can only describe as demonic. He's smiling and sticking his tongue out almost to his chest. He lets out a long hiss as his eyes roll into the back of his head, seemingly invisible to the other people passing him. And I still to this day do not understand how I was so far away but heard his hiss as if though it was right next to my ear. I'm sure it could be dismissed as the homeless guy was on drugs, but I think truly this was a demon. It messed me up for a really long time and to this day is a big factor in my belief of the paranormal. 2 years ago, I took my wife, my father and son, then 3, to visit family in rural New England in America. They live on a small farm with buildings that date back to the 1700s, which have been restored and modernized, and a guest house which was built about 20 years ago. My cousin is a prolific photographer, and my auntie had decorated most of the rooms in the main house and guest house with her photos. We didn't notice much about the photos in the guest house when we first arrived, probably because we were all jet-lagged. The next morning, after a sound night's sleep, we were sitting in the main family room eating breakfast and making plans for the day when I noticed that my son was keeping his head down and not answering my father whenever he spoke to him, which was unusual because even at that young age they were very close. I looked over to my dad and noticed that he was sitting in front of a photo of a room in a rundown house. The room had a large window with sunlight streaming in, casting shadows across the length of the room towards a dark corner. I got an uneasy feeling from the photo, but I really didn't think much more of it. We finished breakfast and all got up from the table, and I noticed my son was walking in a wide arc around the end of the table where my father had been sitting. Again, weird behavior, but I just dismissed it as a weird 3-year-old thing. Over the next day or so, I noticed him becoming more and more uneasy anytime we were at the dining table and doing whatever he could to avoid looking at the photo. I decided to ask him what was wrong, and he answered me very matter-of-factly. "The bad man in the picture is looking at me. He's very cold and he's not nice." I looked back at the picture and got instant chills down my spine. There was no man in the picture, but I got the feeling that there was more to it than an empty room. I decided to ask my cousin about the picture, and she told me that it was taken at an abandoned farm a bit further upstate. It was one of her favorite pictures, but had always given my aunt the creeps, so it was moved to the guest house. Over the next couple of days, whenever I would ask my son about it, he would say things like, "The bad man is looking at me. He doesn't like me. He wants to hurt me." I didn't think much of it until we were going to bed one night and my son tripped and fell, seemingly for no reason in the middle of the hall, and started crying hysterically. When I asked him if he was okay, he said, "The bad man hurt me on the leg." I checked his leg, and sure enough, on the side of his leg there was a large bruise that looked like he had been struck with a blunt object. I didn't want to play into his fears, but asked him how the bad man could hurt him if he was in the photo downstairs near the table. His answer was enough for me to pack up all our stuff and move to the main house with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and big burly housekeeper right away. "He's not down there. He comes up here when we go to bed." We left soon after, so I never found out anything more about the farm where the photo was taken, but I'm sure there was some kind of evil presence around it. Has anybody experienced something similar? And please share if you have. When I was 14, I had a strange encounter that still puzzles me to this day. On the weekends, I'd sometimes go to my mother's place, as my parents are divorced. The house she lived in was converted into several small apartments. It was a creepy old farmhouse. The house was at least 150, maybe 200 years old. My mom told me off and on of strange sounds that she'd been hearing and seeing things in the corner of her eyes, feeling like she was being watched. This one particular evening when I spent the night, I brought my N64 because my mom would go to bed early and I'd still be up for a few more hours. I still remember to this day what game I was playing, WWF No Mercy. I was sitting Indian style on the floor playing the story mode. I just finished a mission in the game and set down the controller to the left of me, behind me. Directly behind me was a recliner, and I'll never forget what I saw next. I went to grab the controller and saw what appeared to be a hoof, like a horse, next to the controller on the floor. Insects and blood was coming out of the sliver that separated the hoof. I thought to myself, How strange. And I slowly glanced up, and this demonic figure was staring back at me. It leaned down towards me. Its face got down in my face and grinned the most evil smile I'd ever seen. The eyes were black. Its face was red. It was a one-winged creature, and blood was dripping from its teeth. It was so surreal that I immediately went into a panic attack and blacked out. I learned later that it was the fight or flight response that I was having, and several seconds later I came to, laying on the floor, and I could barely move. The demonic figure in the chair was laughing at me. It was as if my fear and energy had been sucked dry from me, and I lost all strength. I did all I could to crawl to my mom's room and woke her up. After I woke her up, we talked, and she believed me. She told me that she too had seen the same thing earlier that week, but didn't want to scare me. I don't know what to make of it and still think of it to this day. I have no doubt demons and angels are real, and believe me, the last thing you ever want to encounter is a demon smiling right in your face. I don't care if you believe me or not, but when two people see the same thing on separate occasions, either we're both crazy or something is and was wrong with that old farmhouse. My mom has thankfully moved since, and we haven't encountered that thing again. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad had been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where, and he asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along and told us that we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long, and for long stretches the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers knocked out almost immediately, so most of the trip is just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy's batteries had all died. All I had left to do was look outside. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I realized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from roof to roof of this suburban lot. Kind of like the scene in Singing in the Rain, which at that point I hadn't seen. It took a second to realize that it wasn't a normal thing to see. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't have jumped roof to roof. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field, he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could sense it smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to face my dad to see if he saw him, but he had been paying attention to the road. When I turned back, I couldn't see the houses anymore as they were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember feeling afraid that it would follow us, that it could if it wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. And sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is so vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way it moved. I bought a painting at a thrift store of a beautiful young angel a few months ago. I was immediately drawn to it, which is not typical for me. I'm not into art or angels, and I hung it up in my bedroom the same day I bought it. The next morning when I woke up, the living room lights were on. I thought that was strange, that I would have not noticed that I'd left them on when I went to bed, since I can see my living room from my bedroom and would notice if the lights were on. The next night, I made sure that they were off when I went to bed, and sure enough, the next morning they were on again. Same thing happened the next night. This time I woke up at around 3 a.m. and could see from my bed the living room lights were on again. After that third night, I had never had an issue again, so I chalked it up to some type of electrical thing and it being a coincidence with the painting, although the lights never turned on automatically during the day, just while I slept. Then, just the other day, I was in my bedroom putting laundry away and the painting started swinging. Like it was very, very noticeable. I just sort of stared at it, watching it, and then it just stopped. That's never happened before. Nothing could have hit it. There were no breezes or drafts. It was really, really swinging. I'm not sure what to think. I don't get a bad feeling from it. And I should mention that I live by myself, so no one could have turned the lights on after I went to bed or moved the painting. I need some help identifying whatever the hell is here with me. I just got back from a week-long vacation last night, and the same activity from the house that I was staying in is going on at my apartment. I apologize in advance for any incoherence in what I say because I haven't gotten much sleep the last week. The house we stayed in was gorgeous, and since my entire extended family was staying there, 18 people, it was also absolutely massive. It was split into 2 parts. The old side of the house, roughly just a basement studio and 3 bedrooms upstairs, and the newer side. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the newer side as no paranormal activity took place there, but it was a gorgeous house. I shared a room with my girlfriend, and since we were the last to arrive, we got the worst room in the house. Not only did we get the smallest room in the house, it was about 10 feet by 10 feet, it was also on the old side of the house, directly in front of the basement stairs. As I had been driving for 6 hours that day, I was pretty tired, so I said hello to everyone and quickly got into bed to go to sleep. It was around 11 p.m. when my girlfriend and I got into bed. She's lucky in the sense that she can fall asleep just about anywhere in 5 minutes, so she was out within seconds. I had a weird uneasy feeling in my chest. Not necessarily a scary feeling, just that annoying alert feeling you get when you feel like something is watching you. And to help ease myself, I hopped right down into a YouTube rabbit hole. About an hour into my journey, I could tell that my girlfriend was having a nightmare, so I put my hand on her arm to gently wake her up. But as soon as I touched her, she bolted awake screaming, mumbled something like "the ghost," and immediately went back to sleep. I had just started to get tired, and safe to say I was sufficiently creeped out at this point, so back down the rabbit hole I went. About 2 hours went by when my girlfriend woke up screaming again, saying the footsteps are close, and then passed out immediately again. I decided I'm not going to sleep that night and went right back to YouTube. Another hour passes and I see my girlfriend sit up in bed, but she was still asleep. She moved, so she was sitting on the edge of the bed and started having a conversation with the corner of the room. She eventually laid back down, but not before I was absolutely terrified. Activity died down after the first night, usually just creaks in the floor or knocks on the wall and door. The only other standout event besides movement around the room happened on the second to last night when something sat down on the edge of my bed. My first thought was that my cat had jumped up on the bed, but I remember I wasn't at my apartment and sat up just in time to see the indentation lift up off the edge of the bed. It couldn't have been my girlfriend as she was on the opposite side of the bed and nowhere near where the indentation happened. Also, the bed I was staying in was as firm as a rock, so it was challenging to push that far down into it. Fast forward one more sleepless night and I'm on my way home. After a long day of driving, I got back and settled down with some Netflix. My girlfriend had plans to go hang out with her friends, so she was out most of the night. I thought I'd finally get a break from the spooky stuff when my dog and cat both start tracking something around my apartment. The way their heads were moving, whatever they saw was moving fast. Now, I've seen them track bugs before, but neither of them really focus on it too much. They usually just huff and ignore it, but this was different. Poppy, my dog, started growling when whatever it was moved into the corner of the room. My cat Anna jumped up right next to me on the couch while Poppy growled at the corner and started to slowly back up towards me. After a full week of crap like this, I wasn't even scared anymore. Just angry and tired because it likes to keep me from falling asleep. Poppy and Anna both track the thing moving out of the corner towards us, so she starts barking like crazy. After I got her to stop barking, I heard a growl come from the center of the room. It was pretty high-pitched, like a small dog or a girl. Judging by where my pets were tracking, it looked like it was very short, very fast, and could jump up on the table and counters. I stood up, stared in its general direction, and said, "Please leave." I got a huge wave of chills and got goosebumps in places I didn't know I could get goosebumps, but I said it again much louder and more stern this time while opening my front door to let it out. Whatever it was got really upset, it seemed. It didn't do anything, but I could feel a lot of anger. My pets tracked it moving towards the door, so I thought that I was in the clear. About 2 minutes later, my dog starts barking at the corners of the room where the door is, while my cat is on full alert staring at the same place. At this point, I just give up and hope it just leaves me alone since it hadn't been violent yet, just annoying. Poppy eventually fell asleep at my feet and Anna had run into the other room, occasionally poking her head out the door to look in and immediately spring back into the room. I just gave up dealing with it at this point. I put my earbuds in to block out the knocks on the walls and watch some YouTube. I decided to stay up until my girlfriend got back to let her know what was happening, but whatever it was took this as an opportunity to mess with me. I was laying on my couch and kept feeling something poking me every 5 minutes. Not hard, just constant pokes on my arms and legs and feet. And after this went on for a while, it pulled up on my nostrils. Again, I just ignored it because I learned it just gets worse if I engage with it. Whenever something like this would happen, I could feel the apartment get much colder, despite my thermostat saying that it was 72 degrees. After hours of knocking, poking, pulling, and the occasional arm brush, my girlfriend finally got home. The second she got through the door, I could tell whatever it was left, as I had no uneasy feeling, and there were no more weird noises, so I had one of the most restful nights I've had in over a week. I don't know if it's gone for good or if it will come back tonight, but I will post an update tomorrow if anything happens. Other than the growl and the short but overwhelming sense of anger, it hasn't been violent or disturbing, just really annoying. Any help on how to identify or safely communicate with it would be greatly appreciated. I was with my girlfriend preparing dinner. The year was 2015 and everything seemed normal. I put on some music and the speakers were in my room. While we were cooking, I noticed that the music was no longer being listened to. I was surprised that something happened with the internet because it was Spotify. I went to the bedroom and I noticed that the playlist continued, but the volume knob had been set to 0. I didn't pay much attention to it at that moment. I set the knob again and went to the kitchen to continue with dinner, and not even 2 minutes passed when, again, I noticed that no music was being heard. This time it seemed really strange to me. I lived alone and we were just my girlfriend and I, and I went into my room, and this time the knob was on one so I could lightly hear some music. I was surprised because it was a physical and not digital fault with what was going on. Again, I turned the knob and returned to the kitchen. I tried not to think about that and concentrated on cooking when suddenly I clearly hear things on the floor, this time in the studio that was next to my room. It bothered me, the idea of passing by these things instead of enjoying a pleasant evening with my girlfriend. I asked her if she had heard that sound, and she said no. I replied that it was clearly a noise from the studio, so she told me, let's take a look. In effect, there were things on the floor. I wanted to think that it had simply fallen, and we picked them up, turned off the lights and left, and we were in the kitchen again when we heard another noise. This time, she could also appreciate that. And I told her something was happening, and she, being a very religious person, told me not to worry. And we went to the studio, and this time, the light was on, and there was again some things being thrown around. There were no open windows or wind currents. It seemed very strange to us. We searched everything, and before leaving, I pronounced aloud that I would leave the light on, and we left kind of nervous. We'd not reached the kitchen when noises were heard again. This time I was really afraid that it was a thief who had entered the house. We ran to the study and the lights were off, and a TV that was there was on with static. We looked at each other, and I told her that that was not normal and that something was happening and we should probably do something. She proposed that we pray, and we went to the kitchen and she took my hands and we said 2 prayers that she knew. When we finished, something was heard again. I wanted to go see, but I was shocked to see that just outside the kitchen, there was an inflatable toy that I used to have to punch for fun in the studio. It was horrible. I had no idea how it had even got there, and at that moment I felt very scared. I didn't know if it was something paranormal or if a person entered the house and was playing the worst joke ever on us. My girlfriend asked me what was wrong with me, why I stood at the door. I told her not to leave the kitchen, that I didn't want her to see that, but she leaned out and screamed. I tried to calm her down. Nothing had ever happened in that house. We were very scared, and at that moment, the bell rang. I answered on the intercom, and nothing. Every time I was more nervous, but I tried to stay calm. I walked towards her, and the bell rang again. I answered, and nothing. I told her, let's get out of here. Something or someone is bothering us. It occurred to me to go to the house of a cousin who lived nearby, and then the lights started to blink. It was terribly terrifying. Getting to the street was a great relief, and by the way, it was completely desolate outside. We walked a few blocks until we reached my cousin's house. We told her everything while our hands were still shaken, and she believed us, and she had some holy water, and that we had to go back because what had happened to us was not normal. When we came back with the holy water, loud music could be heard from the street. We opened the door with fear, and immediately my cousin began to sprinkle holy water all over the place. The inflatable toy was in another location. It seemed that it had moved a few meters from where we last saw it. The knob of the speakers was at maximum, and all the lights in the house were on. It seemed that they had had a small party without us, and it was horrible. Note on the Spotify browser was written reggaeton, and the first playlist was playing. And I hate reggaeton music. I never put that kind of music on before. I don't even know how it's spelled, but it was written the same way that I used to know, and that was very shocking to me. I was never super skeptical of the paranormal, but I didn't believe everything I heard until that night. And for good luck, I can say that after using the holy water, nothing else happened in that house. I no longer live there. I threw the toy away, and the girlfriend is now my wife, and we know that all that was real. These spirits or entities do exist, and we must be careful and have faith in God and not let them disturb us. So this happened a little bit ago. I was 17 at the time. It was summer, so we were heading to my uncle's house. He owns a little house near a beach, and getting to his house, we have to go past this big stretch of forest that spans on and on for about an hour or so. The sun was just covering everything in some nice light after it rose, and then it got weird. I remember that my dad turned off his music to pull up the GPS, and I looked at the forest watching all the trees speed by. Then I also took notice that we were the only cars on the road. The only car. None behind, none in front. Hell, I didn't see another car for like an hour and a half while driving here besides pulling out of my driveway and getting on the road. I thought it was really weird, especially since I'm in a pretty populated area. It's Oregon after all, in the middle of summer. I kept looking at the forest and I kid you not, a clearing opened for a few seconds and I saw two men wearing black suits and black sunglasses, with black gloves and shoes as well, tying some big hairy creature to a tree. I just kept looking at them and they were looking at me, not the car, me directly, like they knew that I saw them. It scared the crap out of me and I asked my dad if he saw them, and he seemed confused and then said that he didn't see a thing. He was too busy driving and looking at his GPS. I don't really believe in strange things like this, but I can't explain what I saw, and I don't know how to feel. Thinking about it now, I just get uneasy and scared. The creature looked like it was chained up, and it wasn't lashing around or anything or freaking out, and to make it worse, as soon as we left that forest, we started to join back in with other cars. It was like I stepped into some sort of crime scene. Has anyone else ever had an experience like this, or can I chalk it up to just my hyper imagination? So I bought a doll today with an attachment and just wanted to share what happened already. So I got her home and placed her on the top of my entertainment center pretty high up. Now for starters, the moment I got her in the car, I put an EMF to her with a built-in spirit box. The EMF was spiking, and after a few seconds of moving it away and moving it closer again, the spirit box said, "Don't." So I stopped and apologized. I spoke to the spirit of the doll while driving, letting the spirit know that it was in good hands, kind of like talking to a friend. Now, once we got home, I placed her down and I decided to leave her for a bit to get accustomed. Upon returning, I decided to do another EMF spirit box check to see if I had any better luck at this point. I'm short, so I wasn't holding it up very high. The spirit box said, "Higher." I raised it higher and then the box asked, "What do you want me to do?" The spirit for some reason was making the meter of the EMF actually bottom out instead of spike, so I requested it to please make the meter go the other way, and it did. Then the box asked, "Am I dead?" I said yes and proceeded to ask for its name, and it said, "Soon." And then all the activity just stopped, almost like it was in shock of finding out that it was dead and needed time to process it. Anyways, though, I just wanted to share this with you guys because it was just an incredible experience to have happen. It started a week ago roughly and has happened multiple times. First of all, I want to mention that I live alone and don't have any pets. Last week I went to sleep at around 2 a.m. and I had my MacBook Pro closed completely on the floor. While I was in the bed, I started to hear typing on the keyboard. It wasn't cracking or anything like that. It was typing, and I'm not imagining it at all. It lasted several minutes and then eventually stopped. I freaked out like crazy that night, but eventually managed to fall asleep. The next day I also went to bed late, and I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night by the typing noise of the keyboard. It wasn't a dream, nor am I crazy. It really happened. I was very scared, so I turned on the lights and the typing stopped. My computer was still closed, as in shut down, so I turned off the lights, and 10 minutes later I heard the typing on my keyboard again. This time too it lasted for a long time, and I almost had a panic attack, and keep in mind, I live alone. It happened again other nights. Every time it happens after I go to sleep, and it can be right after I got to sleep and put the MacBook down, or many hours later in the early morning while I'm still sleeping. It never happens while I'm actually using the computer itself. Last night I also couldn't sleep because I heard weird noises coming from the windows, like some weird gush of wind, loud noises around my windows, and of course, again, the typing on the computer. And I'm terrified. What could this be? I was thinking I'm either spied on by some agency that managed to infiltrate my computer and search for something. But what? I have nothing to hide, and I'm a completely average guy. I've never committed any crime whatsoever. And even then, if the computer is closed, how can I hear the typing? I mean, even if they infiltrated, I shouldn't hear typing on the keyboard. Or is it something paranormal? I read I'm not the first guy who has heard typing of a keyboard at night, and other people who have experienced it were equally frightened. Some of them used a mechanical keyboard which is exposed at night, and I have a MacBook Pro and my keyboard isn't exposed because at night I close the PC, as I said. In the sense, I shut the screen above my keyboard so it's not exposed to air. But please, help me figure this out, because it's freaking me out. I'm currently staying in a farmhouse in Northern Ireland. It's a pretty old place and apparently was built on top of the original one according to the owner of it. I never really have believed in any paranormal type stuff, just thought it was too crazy and far-fetched to be real, and I've been telling myself that for the past few hours after what happened. I've already mostly explained what happened in the title, but I'll go into more detail. I woke up to hear the radio next to my bed, which I didn't even know worked, playing random channels, songs, some talking on chat shows or something. I can't really remember as I was just waking up. The radio did finally stop changing channels after a few seconds, however, and was left playing the song Hello by Dragonette. I had to look that up in the morning from the lyrics that I heard. I heard this section of the song before I switched off the radio at the plug. Kinda like this thing, but there's something you should know. I just came to say hello. Hey, I could stick around and get along with you. Now, needless to say, I was already crapping bricks a bit at this point, not because of the lyrics or anything. Like I said, I don't really believe in ghosts, rather just the loud noises waking me up was a little rough, and so I felt on edge. The thing that really tied it all together for me and made me so scared was when I checked my phone and it was 3:33 a.m. I moved upstairs to another bedroom and sat up with the lamps on either side of me for hours, watching something on Netflix to take my mind off of stuff. I don't really know what I want out of posting this experience. Maybe some reassurance to tell me that it's all BS. Edit. Things just got a little bit more spicy. I wrote the first part of the post from the upstairs bedroom in the morning, and just came down from upstairs to the room this happened in and looked at the radio. It was off on the wall switch, but the radio setting was also turned off on the radio. The only way it can actually play the radio stations is by switching it to on the radio with a switch, so it wasn't me hitting it while I slept or something. And now, I'm kinda spooked out. This was a while back, but it still bothers me to this day. It was 2016 and me, 22, and my husband, 28, were moving into a rental home. I was 6 months pregnant and we were thrilled to move into a nice community since before we had lived in a pretty sketchy part of town. We didn't know much about this rental except it was in a good school district, a low crime area, and within our budget. Time passes without any problems and soon our son was born. His birth was textbook and he slept well in the hospital. This all changed when we brought him home. The first night home was awful. Every time we set him in his crib, he screamed. And I'm not talking a normal "I'm hungry" or "need a new diaper" cry. A legitimate scream like he was in pain. My husband and I had to take shifts at night so one could be with him and the other could sleep a little. My shift was always second and started around 2 to 3 in the morning. I tried my best to sleep, but shortly after my son's birth, I began having horrible nightmares. I would dream nightly about my son being hurt or needing me, and I couldn't get to him. At my 6-week checkup, I told my OBGYN, and she believed that I was having postpartum anxiety and prescribed me some medicine and recommended that I see a counselor. Weeks passed by since starting the medication and counseling, and I was still having nightmares, and my son was still screaming all night long. His pediatrician told us that it was colic and that we just needed to wait it out. Everything changed when he turned 3 months old. His screaming continued but started to be all day instead of just at night. My nightmares became much more specific. One night, I dreamed that I walked into my son's room and he was on fire and screaming. Though I was in his room, my feet were stuck inside his doorway. I couldn't move or speak. I could only watch my son screaming in pain. I woke up screaming and hyperventilating. My husband ran into our room and tried to console me. In the next few days, I could not sleep. I spent most of my days at work and my evenings sitting on my front porch talking to my next-door neighbor. She was the sweetest old lady who had lived in this neighborhood since it was originally built in the 70s. I guess she could tell something was wrong and asked me if I was okay. Reluctantly, I told her how my baby had been acting and how I was having horrible nightmares. She was sympathetic and asked me to elaborate, and I didn't feel comfortable telling her the details, so I just told her that I had dreams about fires in the house. Her face quickly changed from caring and concerned to horrified. Seconds of quiet felt like hours before she spoke again. "Do you know what happened at this house?" she said, and I told her no. She sighed and looked down before grabbing my hands and looking at me. She goes on to tell me that a few years ago there was a fire at the house due to some faulty wiring done poorly by the landlord. There was a young family with a 3-month-old baby living there, and unfortunately the baby passed away in the fire. She said the couple moved away and the house was renovated and put up for rent after. And at that moment, I was in complete shock. I ran inside to my husband holding our baby and told him that we needed to leave. He must have seen the fear in my eyes since he didn't ask me to explain myself until we got in the car. I explained what happened in the house and how I felt like my dreams were warnings that we needed to leave before something happened to our baby. Luckily, my brother-in-law lived in the next town over, so we went there. The first night we stayed in his house, our son slept through the entire night, not a single peep. I checked on him every hour since it was so unusual for him to sleep this well, and from then on, apart from normal baby stuff, my son never screamed again like he did in that house. My husband packed our stuff and we stayed with my brother-in-law until we were able to get out of our lease and rent a new place. I never went back, and I will never go back. I just pray for whoever moves in there next. About a year and a half ago in June, my brother and I were driving back from LA, Nevada to Las Vegas. If you know Nevada, you understand how sparsely populated the state is outside of Reno, Carson City, and Las Vegas. So, we were about an hour or so into the drive when we realized that we wouldn't make it back without falling asleep, as it was already pretty late at night. We agreed to stop at a hotel for the night. We came to a town called King. I had never heard of King, Nevada, nor have I found anything about it since, no matter what I looked up or asked. It looked like one of those old Western movie towns where it's one road with little buildings on each side and about the same size as one of those towns. All there really was of note was the hotel that we stayed at, called King Hotel, and a McDonald's. The few other buildings didn't seem worth mentioning. We hadn't seen anyone or any cars while driving in the town. We went into the hotel and saw the only person we ever saw in that place, the single clerk at the front desk. We got our room key and went straight to bed. We were awoken by talking outside of what we assumed was around 8 because when we woke up, we realized that there was no clock in the room. In fact, there were only beds, a hotel, a shower, and a sink, not even a dresser or a TV. We went outside to leave. The hotel clerk wasn't there to check out, so we left our key at the desk. No one else was inside the hotel or outside. We still haven't figured out where the talking came from. We went to McDonald's to eat, however, it was drive-through only. We ordered our McMuffins at the drive-through, then rounded the corner to pay and get our food at the next window. We saw the bag already sitting on the shelf outside the window with the window closed and the inside dark. We got our food and left without paying. We didn't want to stick around anymore. We were honestly getting a bit scared at this point. There was no cell service, nor do we remember ever arriving there. We just suddenly found ourselves in that town. I was reminded of this because a few hours ago, I read a green text about a similar experience someone had in Utah. We only saw one person there, the hotel attendant, and we drove for half an hour before we saw any road signs again. He and I both remembered exactly the same, so I don't think we hallucinated or anything like that. If you have any ideas on what happened in that town, please let me know. As I'm sure some of you are aware, the hunting season for white-tailed deer is about to start this weekend. I'm a 25-year-old female and have been spending a decent chunk of time in the stand with my partner, in life and in most ventures generally, because we've discovered that hogs have been rooting up the oats and generally causing havoc and scaring away the deer from the feeder. We've gone out a handful of times in the last 2 weeks, attempting to catch the miscreants at it, and so far no luck, and it's been very frustrating. At any rate, because of the hogs, I've been spending more time in a stand after dark than I ever have in my life. We've been up there from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., and every other weird time slot you can think of. I mention this just in case it's relevant or helps paint a better picture. There have been a few things that have happened that I've struggled to explain away or rationalize, and my partner is out of ideas too. The first thing happened about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning with a decent chunk of moon illuminating the area. I was only half paying attention to my surroundings because I had already written the night off as a bust when, all of a sudden, I become aware of a weird whirring or flapping sound. I thought it originated from somewhat behind me, but my partner said that he had heard it coming from away to the front left of us. At any rate, it was loud, airborne, and passing quickly over us and away. I am very familiar with the sounds drones make, and that wasn't it. It also wasn't a helicopter. The sound was too small, if that makes sense. And it wasn't a bird. It sounded way too mechanical. It was flying very low, probably just above the tree line, and we couldn't see anything. The second thing happened about a week ago. We weren't in the stand, but it was weird and out of the norm, so I'll mention it. We live on the same property that the stand is on, and it was around 9 or 10 at night when all of a sudden there was a distant boom, like an explosion, which hit our home with a very hard thud. If you've ever spent any time around heavy artillery or explosives, you'll know what I mean. It was strong enough that my sister-in-law, who lives down the road, called us asking what the hell just happened. It could have been a natural gas explosion, but The weirdest part is that my partner did some internet digging and a local emergency management website had posted asking for any info on an unknown explosion back in 2016 during that time of year, and we still have no clue what it was. And then lastly, tonight, we were out in the stand once again, and it's gotten cold and we've had a ton of rain all day, so everything was damp and dripping. We went out at 10 and it was about 10:30. I was preoccupied with trying to keep my fingers and toes warm when suddenly I became aware of a weird murmuring. My partner heard it too, but he was hearing damaged, so I don't think he heard the full breadth of the tones. To me, it kind of sounded like muffled voices off in the distance, like several someones having a conversation too far off to make out the individual words. But the direction the sounds were coming from doesn't have any buildings or dwellings, it's just woods. And there were several different tones. My partner said it kind of sounded like a cow moaning, but not quite. There are cattle in the area and we heard them vocalizing all the time. That wasn't that. And there isn't any grazing land in the vicinity of the sound's origins. They carried on for maybe 30 seconds, slightly rose in crescendo, and then died off and faded away completely. I want to stress how indistinct these sounds were. If I hadn't been listening intently, I don't know if I would have heard it. All of this, coupled with the general gut feeling I have whenever I'm out in the dark alone, has me wondering. I don't necessarily feel in danger, just generally watched and noticed. I have very good instincts and I try to listen to them. I'd love to know what you all think. There may be a rational explanation for all these phenomenon. All I know is I don't want to be another hunter with another creepy story, but I feel like I'm starting to see a bell curve emerge. My dad moved into a house in the middle of the woods about 2 years ago, and I moved in with him soon after to help him get around and take care of the house and whatnot. Now, side note, it's an old house on land that Native Americans heavily inhabited in the South. Honestly, this house is really weird. The first night I spent here, I was woken up by a woman whispering, "Is anyone home?" right next to me as I was about to fall asleep. My dad didn't believe me when I told him the next day. It's taken a while to get used to living in the deep woods, but something about this property is very off. There's been more than a few times where I've actually felt a heavy presence, almost like someone is standing right behind me. I have a cat who I rely on to alert me when there's someone approaching my room, and there have been times where he's alerted me but nobody was there. Other times he stares at the same corner of my room with an expression that tells me that he can see something I can't. And there's been more times I can count where I'll be leaving a room and a cabinet will slam, or it sounds like something was moved behind me. It sounds silly, but it's odd enough for me to notice. I mentioned it to my father, but he didn't think much of it until early this AM when he woke up and went downstairs to find the basement flooded. Somehow the shower in the basement was turned on and the drain had been clogged. Neither of us used that shower in the basement, and he's now fully convinced that there's a ghost in this house. I don't know. If you ask me, I think it's more than the house. I get that feeling even when I'm out on a hike. I always leave food scraps and leftovers out in the tree line for the animals, and sometimes coincidentally find little treasures in the same spot, almost like I made a trade with Mother Nature. Once I left strawberry cake leftovers out, and the next day found a stone with a pink crystal formation. Another time I found an arrowhead carved out of stone. Just kind of a thought that I figured I'd share. I don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. I'm not religious or spiritual and just generally don't think any of that sort of exists. But tonight I encountered something that genuinely terrified me and can't form any sort of logical explanation for it. So I have a dog, and I almost always walk her at night due to my schedule. I'm currently living with my parents, who live in a very upscale private community, one which I'm extremely familiar with and have walked hundreds of times before, both during the day and night. It's a very safe place, and I'd never felt any sort of risk walking at night aside from visibility to passing cars, for which I wear reflective armbands. Tonight I was taking my dog on her daily walk, and we crossed a road that led from one section of the subdivision to another. While entering this next section, I noticed up ahead, about 80 to 100 meters, a figure moving down the road across from the direction I was going. The best way I can describe it is if a person was wearing a slightly luminescent white hat skipping down the street. The problem is, first of all, there wasn't enough light to get a clear view of whatever I saw. I could definitely see the light that appeared to be a hat, if it was a person wearing one, but not enough to discern anything more, and the most disconcerting thing was that even if it was a person wearing a light-up hat skipping down the street, they would have been moving in slow motion, almost suspended in air in between jumps. There was also no sound either. After seeing this, I yelled out several times asking if there was anyone there and didn't get any response. At that point, I noticed that my dog was whimpering and her tail was between her legs. For me, this was the scariest part because I've never seen her act like that in any situation. If she sees another person while we're out walking, she'll get excited and pull on the leash, wanting to go up and say hi. If there's another dog or animal she's unsure of, she'll bark and start running in circles around me. I have never, under any circumstance, seen her act scared and start whimpering. That was enough to make me go nope and turn the hell around. Like I said, I don't have any belief in anything paranormal, but I have no intention of messing around with whatever the hell I had just encountered, and so we turned around and finished our walk. I admittedly glanced behind me, frequently making sure that there wasn't anyone following, and we're now home safe, which leads to me typing this right now. I've never experienced something like that, and I have no idea what to think. Rationally, I think it would be more likely I hallucinated or something rather than it being anything paranormal. But the thing that bugs me the most is my dog's extremely uncharacteristic reaction. If I had been seeing things, then why would she have behaved in a way that she had never before? I just wanted to share my story here, and hopefully I don't sound insane. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/letsreadofficial or over email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember to be a good girl and eat your vegetables. Along the silent roads of Suffolk, bodies began to appear, each one a message no one can decipher. As the darkness tightens its grip, whispers of a faceless killer spread, leaving a community trapped between fear and the unknown. Hear the entire story over on my true crime channel, Saturn Soul, linked down below. Now enjoy the stories. Hola, Joel. My name is Maria, and although I think I'm a little older than your usual crowd, I think my story is just as scary as any other. Back when I was just 21 years young, I went on a date with a guy in my home state of Florida. Since it was our first date, I felt nervous as hell just sitting across from this guy I'd met at a friend's party a week earlier. His name was Roddy, short for Rodrigo, and he seemed really nice. He had a cute smile, he was kind of shy, and he worked at a record store downtown. This was 1983, and Miami was buzzing, and I was excited for our first date at this little Cuban restaurant in Little Havana. I'd never been there before, but everyone said the food was amazing and it had this cozy vibe with colorful tiles and old photos on the walls. Roddy picked me up at my apartment and we drove to the restaurant in his beat-up Chevy, and I wanted to make a good impression, but I was already second-guessing everything by the time I got there. The air was warm and sticky. It was typical Miami, and the radio played some new wave song that I pretended to like. And I just remember fidgeting with my bracelet, trying to calm my nerves. And then, when we walked into the restaurant, the smell of roasted pork and fresh coffee hit me, and I started to relax a little. The place was packed. Families were laughing and waiters rushing around, and we got a small table near the window, and I remember thinking how the streetlights outside made everything just feel alive. We ordered some food, and I was just starting to feel like maybe this date wouldn't be a disaster. Roddy was telling me about some vinyl he'd found at work, and I was trying to act interested even though I wasn't big into music. I sipped my soda and I glanced out the window every now and then. The street was busy, with cars cruising by and people walking under the neon signs, and everything felt normal, like any other night in Miami, and then it happened. I didn't even realize what was going on at first. There was this loud pop, like firecrackers, and the window next to us shattered. Glass sprayed everywhere and I froze, my heart pounding harder than I'd ever felt before. The pops kept coming, fast and sharp, and people started screaming. I ducked under a table, my hands over my head, not even thinking, just moving on instinct. I could feel bits of glass under my palms. My dress was probably ruined, but I didn't care. All I could think was, please God, I don't want to die. And Roddy was under the table with me, and his face I remember being pale as a ghost. I could hear plates crashing, chairs scraping, and more screams. The gunfire kept coming, but it wasn't like in the movies. It was messy, chaotic, so loud that my ears were ringing, and I kept waiting for it to stop, but it felt like forever. I was shaking. My breath was coming in these short gasps, and I couldn't stop picturing someone bursting through the door to finish us off. I didn't know what was happening or why it was happening. All I knew was that I was terrified. When the shooting finally stopped, it was like the world held its breath. There was this terrible silence at first, one that was eventually broken by people crying or shouting in Spanish. I stayed under the table, too scared to move. Roddy grabbed my hand, and even though it felt weirdly intimate for our first date, I let him. But my mind was racing. Were we safe? Was the shooter gone? Or was he just waiting for round two? I kept thinking about my mom, how I hadn't called her that day, and how I might never get the chance ever again. And somehow, I think it was a waiter, yelled that everything was over, and for everyone to stay calm. I peeked out from under the table. The restaurant was a mess. There were tables flipped over, food spilled everywhere, glass glittering on the floor like little razor-sharp pieces of confetti. People were huddled together, some crying, others checking on each other. I saw an older woman holding a napkin to her arm with blood seeping through and staining the white fabric. But thankfully, that was the worst injury I saw. Nobody seemed to be dead, and although I felt a wave of relief, my body wouldn't stop shaking. Roddy helped me to my feet, and for a few seconds we just stood there, looking around and not knowing what to do. The air smelled like something burning and spilled coffee. My ears were still ringing, my legs felt like jelly. I noticed my dress had a tear at the hem, and for some reason, that there made me want to cry. It was such a stupid thing to care about when I just thought that I was about to die, but all of it just kind of hit me really hard. I kept thinking it was supposed to be a fun night, but somehow it turned into a nightmare. Police sirens started wailing outside, and soon there were cops everywhere asking questions and telling us to stay put. I heard someone say it was a Cuban dissident, someone angry about politics who shot up the place to make a point. They didn't want to kill anyone, they just wanted to wreck the restaurant. And I didn't understand any of it. Why that place? Why that night? I felt this weird mix of relief that no one was seriously hurt, but also an anger that someone could be so evil as to ruin a normal night and put people's lives at risk, all for nothing more than politics. And before we left, me and Roddy gave our statements to the police. I don't even remember what I said. My mind was foggy, but once we were done, they told us we could leave. Roddy offered to drive me and I nodded, still too shaken to argue and not wanting to be alone. We didn't talk much on the way back. The radio was off and the city felt different, like it had shown me a side that I didn't want to see. When we got to my apartment, I just sat in his car for a minute, not ready to be alone. He asked me if I was okay and I said yeah, even though I clearly wasn't. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of the gunfire and the way the glass exploded, the way my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I kept thinking about how I'd been so worried about my hair or whether Roddy liked me, and then the world turned upside down in a second. It made everything feel so fragile, like anything could happen at any time. Roddy called the next day to check on me and we talked a little about what happened. We went out again a week later, but it wasn't the same. The spark was gone, maybe because we'd shared something so intense too soon, and I didn't blame him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the date had been doomed from the start. The restaurant stayed closed for a while, and I never went back, even after it reopened. I couldn't imagine sitting there again, eating like nothing had happened. And for a long time I got nervous in crowded places. Every loud noise made me jump, and I'd see a car backfire, hear a door slam, and feel that same panic in my chest. I started avoiding Little Havana altogether, which was silly because it wasn't the neighborhood's fault. I just couldn't handle the memories. But over time, things got better. I went on other dates and laughed and felt normal again. But obviously that night stuck with me like a scar that you forget about until you catch a glimpse of it. It was the night that I learned how quickly everything can change and how you can plan for a perfect evening and end up hiding underneath a table, praying you'll make it out alive. So I've been a listener for a while and I love your stories, and I think that you might like to read one of mine which involves my terrible dating life. His name was Jay and we'd matched on an app. He seemed confident, maybe a bit cocky, but in a charming way. He was a dude from a rough part of town, always posting about his souped-up car and flashy sneakers on social media. Hood rich, I guess you could call it. Big attitude, bigger dreams, but probably not much in his bank account. Still, he had a vibe and I was curious. He suggested we go for a drive, maybe grab some food somewhere low-key, and it sounded fun, so I said yes. I've been looking forward to the date for days. I got ready that evening, keeping it simple, jeans, a cute top, some sneakers in case we ended up walking somewhere, and Jay pulled up outside my flat in this really loud and shiny car. The thing was decked out with tinted windows, had some low suspension, and a very bass-heavy sound system that actually rattled the windows before I even stepped outside. And he leaned out the driver's side window, kind of smiling, and I hopped in. And the car smelled like air freshener and this leather polish. He was wearing a tracksuit, all designer, and a gold chain that looked heavier than it needed to be. I thought he was trying a bit hard, but I guess I didn't mind. He seemed excited to show off. And we drove through the city. Music was blaring, and I was having a decent time. Jay was chatty, telling me about his car and how he'd saved up for the mods and how he'd been in a few street races. I wasn't actually sure if he was exaggerating, but I just kind of nodded along. And the streets were busy, lights were flashing, and I was starting to relax and thinking this might actually be a fun night. And he asked if I wanted to see what the car could do, and I just shrugged, thinking he'd just rev the engine or something. But that was a big mistake. We pulled onto a quieter road, and Jay's whole vibe changed. His smile got wider, and he started driving faster, way faster. The speedometer climbed, and my stomach flipped as the car roared. I gripped the seat, trying to play it cool, but I was clearly nervous. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't want to seem boring. And he was weaving through traffic, cutting corners, and I could feel the car vibrating underneath me. And I kept thinking that he'd slow down, but he didn't. And then I heard it. Sirens behind us. At first I thought it was just an ambulance maybe, but Jay's face got excited. He glanced in the rearview mirror and swore under his breath. I turned around and saw these flashing lights behind us, and my heart sank. Police, 2 cars, maybe 3 right on our tail. I asked what was going on, but Jay didn't answer. He just floored it. And the car pushed forward, and I was just pinned in my seat. We were flying now, way over the speed limit, dodging other cars like something out of a movie. My hands were sweaty and my chest was feeling tight. I wanted to scream at him to stop, but my voice was just stuck, like a dream. The sirens were louder, closer, and I could see the police cars in the side mirror, and their lights were blinding me. Jay was focused, hands gripping the wheel, but I could tell that he was panicking too. The city started to blur past. Street lights, buildings, everything just looked like a streak, and I didn't know where we were anymore. We hit this long stretch of road, and I thought that maybe we might actually lose them, but the police didn't stop. I heard a loud bang, and the car swerved hard. My head slammed against the window, and I remember yelling. Jay shouted something, but I couldn't make it out over the noise. I looked back and saw one of the police cars had rammed us. The rear of that BMW was crumpled, and the back windshield was cracked. I realized later it was one of those pit maneuvers that I'd seen on TV where they hit your car and try to make it spin out, and if you asked me, it worked a little bit too well. The car started to skid, the tires were screeching, and we spun across the road before coming to a stop. I was shaking, my ears were ringing from the impact. Before I could process what was happening, there was another crash, and glass exploded everywhere. The driver's side window was suddenly gone, shattered by something heavy, maybe a baton, I have no idea. I just remember screaming, covering my face as those shards started to rain into the car. My window was the next to smash, and I felt the air rush in. I looked up and there were police everywhere, surrounding us. The cars were angled to block us in, lights flashing so bright that it was hurting my eyes, and I saw guns. Actual guns, not just like stun guns, pointed right at me through the broken windows. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it might explode. I froze, hands up trying to show that I wasn't a threat. Jay was yelling, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying. The police were shouting too, telling us to get out with our hands up. And I was terrified, but I managed to open the door and stumble out. The road was cold under my feet, and I realized that I'd lost a shoe somewhere in the chaos. My hands were trembling as I held them above my head and kept my eyes down, too scared to even look at the officers. They grabbed me, not roughly but firmly, and pulled me away from the car. I saw them drag Jay out, pinning him to the ground. He was still shouting, something about how they had no right, but they weren't listening. I was led to the side of the road where an officer started asking me questions. They wanted to know my name, what I was doing, if I knew why Jay ran. And I told them it was our first date, that I had no idea what was going on. My voice was shaky, and I felt tears filling up in my eyes, but I held it together. The police searched me, checked my bag while I stood there, shivering and humiliated while cars slowed down and their passengers were just staring at us. And the police kept me there for what felt like forever, asking the same questions over and over. And I told them I barely knew Jay, that I'd literally just met him online, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. They said the car was flagged for something. It was stolen maybe, or linked to a crime. I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. All I could think about was how I'd ended up here on the side of the road, surrounded by cops with guns, all because I thought a drive with a guy might be fun. And eventually they let me go. They didn't arrest me, thank God, but they took my details and said they might call later. Obviously, Jay wasn't so lucky. He got cuffed and shoved into the back of a police van, and I didn't stick around to see what happened next. One of the officers drove me home, and I sat in the back of the car staring out the window. When I got to my place, I locked the door, sank onto the couch, and just sat there trying to process everything. My phone was blowing up with texts and calls from friends, and they were most probably wondering how the date went, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to answer. I eventually deleted Jay's number, unmatched him on the app, and swore that I'd never go on a date ever again. All I wanted was a fun night out, and instead, I got to experience what it was like to pretty much play Grand Theft Auto in real life. I'd been excited about my date with Alexei. He was a handsome Greek boy, successful and wealthy, and everything that sounded perfect on paper. We met through a mutual friend who said he was a great catch, and when he asked me out to lunch, I thought it could be fun. I got ready and headed to the fancy restaurant that he'd picked out. It was one of those places with white tablecloths and waiters who kind of hovered, and I felt a little out of my element, but I was ready to give it a chance. And the date started off okay. Alexei showed up in a sleek car wearing a tailored suit, and he had this confident smile that made me think he was used to getting his way. We sat down and I noticed that he didn't even look at the menu before ordering for both of us. Now, I thought it was a bit odd, but I let it slide, figuring that he just wanted to take charge. The food came quickly and I tried to make small talk, asking about his work and his hobbies, and he answered in short, clipped sentences like he was too important to bother with details. It felt like he was sizing me up instead of actually listening. And then I noticed how he treated the waiter. When the guy brought the wrong wine, Alexei snapped at him. His voice was sharp and cold, saying that he shouldn't have to explain himself to someone who couldn't do their job right. The waiter apologized, but Alexei kept going, calling him incompetent with this low, cutting tone. And I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just impatience, it was cruel. I tried to change the subject, but Alexei barely acknowledged me, like I was just there to fill a seat. He rushed through the meal, checked his watch every few minutes, and when the bill came, he tossed his credit card down without even looking at it. I offered to split it just to be polite, but he waved me off, saying it was nothing. By the end of lunch, I knew that I didn't want to see him again. His controlling vibe, the way he treated people, it was a hard pass, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a scene, and honestly, I just wanted to get home. My car was in the shop, so I'd taken a cab to the restaurant. When Alexei offered to drive me home, I hesitated, but it was a long way back and I didn't have much cash for another cab. I figured that I could handle a short ride, smile, and say goodbye forever. We got into his car, and at first it seemed fine. He asked for my address and I gave it to him, expecting a quick trip. But as we drove, I noticed that he wasn't heading toward my neighborhood. The city streets turned into quieter roads and then into winding country lanes with nothing but fields and trees. I asked where he was going, trying to keep my voice calm, but he just sort of smirked and said he was taking a scenic route. And at that point, my heart started pounding. Now, this was well before cell phones, so I had no way of calling anyone, no way to tell anyone where I was. I was just alone with some guy, and the further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The countryside stretched out, empty and endless. No houses, no gas stations, just open fields and the occasional barn. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. I asked again, more firmly, to take me home. Alexei's demeanor changed. His voice got low, and he said he'd figured me out. He thought I'd used him for a free lunch, that I'd played him by letting him pay and acting like I was interested when I had no intention of seeing him again. He said I'd wasted his time and his gas money, like I'd tricked him on purpose. I tried to explain that I hadn't meant to mislead him, that I just didn't feel a connection, but he wasn't listening. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He looked at me, his eyes were very hard, and he said he could drive me deeper into the middle of nowhere. He said he could do whatever he wanted, and no one would find me for days, maybe weeks. And my whole body seized up. I didn't know if he was serious or just trying to scare me, but at that moment, I believed he could do it. I was trapped in his car, miles from anywhere, with no way to get help. And I felt so small, so helpless, and I started begging him to take me home. My voice was shaking, trying to keep him calm. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't mean to upset him, anything to get him to turn the car around. He didn't say much after that. He just kept driving, his hands tight on the wheel, while I sat there, my heart racing, watching the empty fields roll by. I kept thinking about how no one knew where I was, how I'd made a mistake getting into his car. I thought about my family, my friends, and how I might not see them again if this went wrong. It felt like hours, though it was probably less, before he finally turned the car around. He didn't say why, didn't explain. He just started heading back toward town, and I didn't dare say anything to risk changing his mind. When we finally pulled into my neighborhood, I felt like I could breathe again, but I was still shaking. He stopped in front of my apartment and I reached for the door handle, desperate to get out. Before I could, he grabbed my arm, looked me in the eye and said that he could have done anything to me out there, and no one would have stopped him. He said I should remember that. And then he let go, and I stumbled out of the car, barely able to stand. I didn't look back as he drove off. I just ran inside, locked the door, and sat there trying to process what had happened. I reported it to the police the next day. I was scared, but I couldn't let it go. I told them everything, how he'd driven me out to the countryside, what he'd said, and how he'd made me feel like my life was in his hands. They brought him in, but Alexei told a completely different story. He'd said he'd just driven me home like I'd asked, and that he'd taken a longer route because he wanted to talk and that I was overreacting. He played it off like I was some dramatic girl making a big deal out of nothing. The cops listened to both of us, but there wasn't much evidence, just my word against his. In the end, they let him go with a warning. I was furious, but I wasn't surprised. He was rich, charming when he wanted to be, and he knew how to spin a yarn. The way that he made me feel so powerless. I started double-checking my locks at night, looking over my shoulder when I walked home. I never saw Alexei again, and I was grateful for that. But the whole thing left a mark. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a reminder of how quickly things can turn, how someone can seem perfect on the outside and still be dangerous. I learned to trust my gut after that, to listen when something feels off, and I never let anyone drive me home again unless I was absolutely sure that I could trust them. My name's Camille, and I'll be honest, my dating history was a mess. I've been on dating apps for a while, swiping through profiles, hoping to find someone different. I always seem to end up with the same kind of guys, though. Mean, rough, and if I'm being honest, sometimes violent. A lot of them were into some pretty edgy stuff, like drug dealing, or they were MMA fighters with egos that were bigger than their biceps, and I was pretty much tired of it at that point. I wanted something better, someone who wasn't like that. So when I matched with this one guy, we'll just call him Tom, I actually felt a spark of hope. And his profile seemed normal. He had a steady job, liked hiking, and didn't come off like he was trying to prove anything. We started chatting, and he was kind and funny even. I told myself this could be a fresh start. We texted for a couple of weeks, and I opened up a bit about my past. Not everything, but enough to let him know that I'd been with some bad guys and was trying to move past that phase of my life. And he didn't judge, which was nice. He listened, asked questions, and seemed to get it. And eventually we decided to meet up. I suggested a place on the outer limits of the city, a quiet little pub that I'd been to once or twice. It wasn't exactly fancy, but it was far enough from my usual haunts that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Or so I thought. I got to the pub and grabbed a table near the back. Tom showed up right on time, and he looked just like he did in his pictures. Average height, brown hair, very kind eyes. And he smiled when he saw me, and I relaxed a little. We ordered some drinks and started talking, and it was easy, just like our text messages. We talked about his job, my love for old music, and random stuff like favorite places to eat. And it felt good, like maybe I'd finally met someone who wasn't completely toxic. And about an hour in, Tom excused himself to use the toilet. I stayed at the table sipping my drink and feeling pretty hopeful. I was thinking about how maybe this could work, how maybe I could leave my old life behind. But when Tom came back, he seemed a bit off. Not upset, just sort of distracted. I asked if everything was okay, but he brushed it off and said it was nothing. I didn't push him though. We just kept talking, but I could tell that something had definitely shifted. He wasn't as relaxed anymore. I wondered if I'd said something wrong, but I couldn't think of anything. We finished our drinks and decided to call it a night. It was getting late and the pub was starting to empty out. Tom offered to drive me home, which I appreciated. I didn't live too far, but it was nice not to have to take a bus or call a cab. We walked out to his car, parked in a dimly lit lot behind the pub, and the air was chilly and I pulled my jacket even tighter. And that's when I noticed a group of people hanging around near the edge of the lot. They looked pretty rough, skinny, twitchy, like they hadn't slept in days. I knew that look. I'd seen it too many times before. I grabbed Tom's arm and whispered that we should hurry. And he nodded and we picked up the pace. But before we could get to his car, the group started moving towards us. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, and I recognized one of them, a guy named Johnny, and he used to hang around with one of my exes, a dealer who had been bad news from the start. I hadn't seen Johnny in years, but I knew that he was trouble. I didn't say anything to Tom, I just wanted to get out of there. They got to us before we could reach the car, though. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, started shouting, asking who Tom was and why he was with me. Tom tried to stay calm, saying that we were just leaving, but they weren't having it. They started circling us, and I saw one of them pull out a crowbar. Tom grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the car, but they weren't letting us go that easily. The guy with the crowbar swung at the car, smashing the side mirror. Another one kicked the door, leaving a dent. I screamed, and Tom yelled at them to back off, but that just made them laugh. Tom unlocked his car finally, and we jumped in. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the seatbelt. The group was still banging on the car, shouting, but Tom didn't wait. He started the engine and peeled out of that lot. I remember the tires screeching. I looked back and saw them standing there, still yelling something, but thankfully they didn't follow us. My heart was racing and I could barely breathe. I kept saying that I was sorry, over and over, like it was my fault. Tom didn't say much, just kept his eyes on the road. The drive to my place was quiet, and I felt awful. I knew these guys were probably connected to my past, and I hated that Tom had gotten caught up in that. I kept thinking about how I'd wanted this to be different, how I'd wanted to leave all of that stuff behind, but I guess it followed me anyway. When we got to my flat, I turned to Tom and apologized again. I told him I didn't know those guys would be there and that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. He was kind about it, said it wasn't my fault, but I could tell that he was shaken. His car was messed up and he'd just been through something very terrifying because of me. And before I got out of the car, Tom said he'd like to see me again. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could try again, that this was just a bad night. And I smiled and said that I'd like that too. I went inside, still feeling shaky but holding on to a tiny bit of hope. Maybe he meant it. Maybe we could get past this. But a few days later I texted him and he didn't reply. I waited a couple of more days and tried again. Nothing. I checked the app and he'd unmatched me. I realized that he must have deleted my number and it hurt, but I couldn't blame him. That night was a nightmare and I knew it was because of me, because of the mess that I've been trying to escape. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, feeling like I'd ruined my chance at something good. I'd wanted so badly to change, to find someone who wasn't part of that world. But it felt like my past was never going to let me go. I thought about reaching out again, maybe explaining more, but I didn't. I figured he'd made his choice and I had to respect that. And I felt embarrassed, ashamed even, if I should have picked a different place or told him more about my past up front, but it was done. All I could do was try and move forward, keep trying to leave that old life behind, and I told myself that I'd be more careful next time if there was a next time. I just hoped that one day I'd meet someone who could see past the mess and give me a real chance. I'd been looking forward to that date like a kid looking forward to Christmas. When he asked me out, I felt a little flutter in my stomach, and he seemed like a charming old-fashioned gentleman with a warm smile and a way of being that made me feel like he was really listening and not just waiting for his turn to speak. So we'd met through a mutual friend, and after a few texts back and forth, he suggested that we grab dinner and take a walk on the beach. It sounded perfect, like something out of a movie. I spent a while picking out my outfit, which ended up being a simple sundress. Nothing too fancy, but nice enough to feel good about myself. And I was nervous but excited, hoping that this could be a start to something. And the evening started great. We went to this little seafood place near the shore. It was cozy with string lights and the smell of fried shrimp in the air, and we talked about everything. Movies, music, our favorite places to hang out, and he was easy to talk to, and I felt comfortable, like I could be myself. He told stories about growing up, his old dog, and some of the dumb stuff he did as a kid. I laughed a lot, and he seemed to enjoy making me smile. After dinner, we decided to walk along the beach. The sun was setting, and it was kind of painting the sky this orange and pink, and the waves were calm, lapping up at the shore. It felt romantic, like we were in our own little Disney world. We walked side by side, our shoes were off, sand cool between my toes, and I was happy, thinking that maybe this was someone I could really like. We talked about random things at first, how he liked surfing, how I'd always wanted to try it. But then, it seemed like the conversation just sort of shifted. He started talking about his family, his parents mostly, and I listened, interested in learning more about him, and that's when he said it, so casually, like it was no big deal. How sometimes his dad used to hit his mom. And my stomach dropped. I stopped walking for a second, thinking that I must have heard him wrong, but he kept going, saying that it didn't seem to hurt their relationship and that it was just how things were sometimes. Now my heart started racing, and not in a good romantic way. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd grown up in a house where my parents never laid a hand on each other no matter how mad they got, so the idea that a man was hitting a woman, especially for something as small as talking back, made me feel physically sick. And I couldn't stay quiet. I told him I didn't agree, that no real man would ever hit a woman just for speaking her mind. I wasn't trying to start a fight, I just couldn't let that slide, because it felt wrong to nod along like it was okay. I thought he'd maybe explain himself or say that he didn't mean it like that, but his face changed, and his eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. I could tell he was mad, but I didn't expect what came next. Before I knew it, he was yelling about how I was insulting his dad, how I didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to stay calm, to backtrack a little, but he refused to listen to me. And then he grabbed my arm, so hard that it hurt, and I froze. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs couldn't move. He gave me a sharp slap across my face that stung and made my eyes water. I stumbled back, shocked, trying to process what was happening. This guy I'd been laughing with for an hour ago was now hitting me. He didn't stop. He grabbed me again, and I felt another blow, this time to my shoulder from a closed fist. And pain shot through me, and I started to panic. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger. And I was scared, really scared, and all I could think was that I needed to get away. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe just a few seconds, maybe a whole minute, but it felt like forever. My face was throbbing, and my arm hurt where he grabbed me, and I was crying and trying to shield myself when suddenly I heard shouting. Not from him, but from other people. Suddenly there were footsteps in the sand, and a group of strangers appeared out of nowhere. They were yelling at him to stop, pulling him off of me. And I fell to my knees, shaking, trying to catch my breath. There were 3 or 4 of them, I think, and within seconds they were between us and keeping us separate. One of them, a woman, knelt beside me asking if I was okay, and I couldn't answer. I was too shaken up, my mind racing with what had just happened. The guy was yelling at the group, cursing and trying to push past them. I looked up and saw him struggling, his face all twisted with anger. I was terrified he'd come back for me, but the people held him back, telling him to leave. Someone mentioned calling the cops, and that's when he bolted. He ran down the beach, disappearing into the dark. and I just sat there, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of something I'd never make sense of. The woman stayed with me, her hand on my shoulder, telling me that I was safe now. Another guy was on his phone, talking to the police and giving them a description of what had happened. My face hurt, and I could feel a bruise forming on my arm, and I was embarrassed, scared, and angry all at once. And I kept thinking about how fast everything had changed. One minute we were having a great date, and the next he was hitting me, and I felt stupid for not seeing it coming, but for thinking he was a good guy. The woman helped me stand, and I realized that I was still crying. She was kind, telling me it wasn't my fault and that I didn't do anything to deserve this. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me was blaming myself for saying anything about his dad. A couple of police officers showed up a little while later. I was sitting on a bench near the beach, wrapped in a jacket one of the strangers had given me. The officer asked me what happened, and I told him everything, from the dinner to the walk to what he said about his parents. And it was hard to talk about, especially with my face still stinging and my hands were still shaking. They asked for his name, his number, and anything I knew about him, and I gave them what I could, but I didn't know much. We'd literally only just met. And they'd said they'd try to find him, but since he ran off, it might take some time, and I just remember nodding and feeling very numb. The woman who stayed with me offered to drive me home, and I didn't want to be alone, so I accepted. And on the way, I felt betrayed, not just by him, but by my own judgment. I thought that he was someone I could trust. And when I got home, I locked the doors and just sat on my couch, still sitting in my nice dress, staring at the wall. My phone was full of notifications, but I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Because that night changed me. I felt less trusting, more guarded, and I kept thinking about his face and how it went from warm and kind to that just cold and angry look so fast. I had bruises for days, reminders of what had happened, but more than the physical pain, it was the shock that stuck with me. I'd gone on a date hoping for something good, and instead I ended up scared and hurt. The police called a few times after that, but they never were able to get in contact with this guy, and I honestly don't know if they ever will. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, and I'll never look at a first date the same way again. I was 22, just out of college, and working at a little coffee shop downtown. He'd come in a few times, always ordering the same black coffee and flashing his smile that always made my stomach jump. He was cute, tall, and had messy brown hair with this quiet confidence that really wasn't cocky. And when he finally asked me out for dinner, I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. And that Friday night, I spent way too long getting ready. Stephen picked me up at my apartment, and we went to this nice little Italian place. It was perfect, it had dim lights, good pasta, and conversation that flowed like we'd known each other forever. And we talked about music, our favorite movies, and how he was saving up to travel. And after dinner, we weren't ready to call it a night. Stephen suggested hitting a club a few blocks away, and I was all in. I loved dancing, and the idea of getting loose with him sounded pretty fun. And the club was packed, the music was loud, and the lights were flashing in a way that kind of makes you feel like you're in a different world. And we danced for hours, laughing and sipping on some overpriced drinks, and I was having the time of my life, feeling free and maybe even a little reckless in the best kind of way. And that's when we came across Dan. He came right up to us on the dance floor, very charming and very full of cocky confidence. He seemed to be older, maybe in his late 30s, and he had this slicked-back hair and a smile that was probably too perfect. And he introduced himself as Dan, but everyone called him Hot Tub Dan. And I didn't think much of that weird nickname at the time. It sounded kind of quirky, like something you'd hear in a college town. And he told us he was throwing an after-party at his place and invited us to come along. A few other people around us overheard and got excited, and before I knew it, there were maybe 6 or 7 of us piling into Ubers and heading to this Hot Tub Dan's house. And I was excited. The night felt like some kind of adventure, and I wasn't ready for it to end. Stephen seemed a little hesitant, but we just brushed it off. I figured he was just being overly cautious, and I was having too much fun to really overthink anything, being young and naive. Now we pull up to Hot Tub Dan's place, and my jaw dropped. It was huge. A modern 2-story house with big windows and a perfectly manicured lawn. It looked like something out of a magazine, and inside it was even more impressive. Everything was sleek and expensive looking, with a massive living room and a bar stocked with every kind of liquor, and sliding glass doors that opened to a backyard with, you guessed it, a hot tub. And the party kicked off fast. Someone cranked up the music and people started pouring some drinks, and Dan was honestly the perfect host, always making sure everyone had a drink in their hand, always smiling and really quick with his jokes. I got caught up in the energy of everything. The hot tub was obviously a big hit. People were jumping in, laughing, splashing around. I didn't get in, but I was honestly just having a blast dancing and chatting with other people. Most of them were around my age, a mix of guys and gals who'd all ended up at Dan's place after the club. And everything seemed nice and the vibe felt carefree, like we were all just chasing a good time. Stephen, though, was acting very differently. He stayed close to me, but he wasn't as into it as I was. He wasn't dancing much, and he kept looking around like he was kind of sizing things up. I noticed him watching Dan a few times, but I really didn't think much of it. I was just too busy with myself, I guess. And at around 2 a.m., I was still going strong, sipping drinks and laughing with some of the girls that I met. And that's when Stephen leaned in and said we should head out. I was surprised. It was late, sure, but the party was still in full swing. I told him I wanted to stay a little longer, but he was firm about it. He said he was tired and didn't feel like sticking around. I was a little annoyed, honestly, and thought that he was being a buzzkill, but he insisted, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of everything, so we called a taxi and left. And the ride home was quiet. I was still riding the high of the night, but Stephen seemed distracted. He didn't say much, just kind of looked out the window. And I figured he was just tired or maybe not as into partying as I was. And when we got to my place, he walked me to my door, gave me a quick hug, and said he'd text me tomorrow. I went to bed, still buzzing from the night, thinking about everything and all the fun that I'd had. It had been such a fun and wild night, and I was already looking forward to telling my friends about it. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, it was the police. And my stomach dropped. They asked if I'd been at a house party the night before, and I said yes, confused. They wanted me to come to the station to answer some questions, and I didn't know what was going on. But I got dressed and went, and my mind was racing the whole way there. Had something happened after we left? Was someone hurt? I had no idea, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something seriously messed up had occurred. At the station, the officers were kind but clearly serious. They sat me down and started asking about the party, stuff like when did I get there, who was I with, and what had I seen. Then and only then did they tell me why they'd called. A girl at the party had been, for lack of better words, intimately assaulted. It happened after Stephen and I left in the early hours of the morning. They didn't give me too many details, but they said it was bad. Dan, the guy who owned the house, was the one who did it. My heart sank as they talked. I thought about how I'd been at that house in that hot tub backyard, laughing and dancing just hours before it happened. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, as it could have been me. They asked if I'd noticed anything off about Dan, anything that stood out. I told them that I hadn't. He seemed charming and friendly, like the kind of guy who just loved throwing parties and socializing. I mentioned how he'd been so welcoming, always making sure everyone was having a good time. The officers exchanged a look, and one of them told me they'd found a lot of evidence at Dan's house. They didn't go into further specifics, but they said he'd recorded things, videos, pictures, stuff he kept on his computer. It made me feel sick. The guy I'd thought was just a fun host was a predator, and I'd been in his house completely clueless. And I left the station feeling shaky. The whole drive home I kept thinking about how close I'd come to something awful. If I'd stayed longer, if I'd gotten in that hot tub, if I had one more drink, any of those things could have put me in danger. And I felt stupid for not seeing it, for thinking the party was just a good time. But more than that, I kept thinking about Stephen. He'd been so insistent about leaving, even when I wanted to stay, and at the time I'd been annoyed, but now realized that he'd probably saved me from something horrible. I texted Steven as soon as I got home, asking if we could talk, and he came over that afternoon and I told him everything the police had said. And he looked pale, like he was just processing all of it too. I asked him why he'd been so set on leaving the party, and he said he didn't know Dan, but something about him felt off. He couldn't explain it exactly. He said it was just a gut feeling based on the way Dan was acting. He was always hovering around the girls, pushing drinks on them and making them feel uneasy. He didn't want to scare me at the time, so he just said he was tired and wanted to go. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I hugged him and thanked him. I don't know if he realized how much he'd done for me that night, so I was sure to let him know. In the weeks that followed, I kept up with the news about Dan, and it turned out his real name wasn't even Dan. It was like Chris or something, and Hot Tub Dan was just what people called him. The police found a ton of evidence on his computer, videos he'd taken of girls at his parties, some of them unaware they were even being recorded. It was disgusting. He'd been doing this for years, throwing these big parties, luring people in and then taking advantage of them. The girl from our night wasn't the first. I felt so angry, but also so helpless. I kept thinking about her, wondering if she was okay and hoping that she had people to actually support her. Dan, or Chris, eventually went to trial a few months later. I wasn't called as a witness, but I followed the case online, and the evidence was just overwhelming, especially the stuff on his hard drive. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. It felt like justice, but it didn't erase what had happened, and I couldn't stop thinking about how lucky I'd been and how one decision had actually kept me safe. And after that, I saw Steven a lot. We started hanging out more and he became someone I trusted completely. I don't know if it was the intensity of that night or just how easy it was to be around him, but we obviously grew close. And I told him one day how grateful I was for what he'd done. He just sort of shrugged and said he was glad that we left when we did. That's Steven, though. Quiet, steady, and always looking out for me.